Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.XFiles. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. Washington City reeked of gunpowder and champagne that April of 1865. The air was thick, caught between celebration and suspicion, like a country unsure whether to breathe a sigh of relief or brace for another blow. The war was ending, yes, but the tension still hung like a fog over the muddy streets. Joy and dread walked hand in hand, and Elias Finch could feel both pressing against his ribs as he made his way through the capital. At 36, Elias had the sharp, weathered look of a man who had seen too much and said even more. His face, once smooth and eager, had settled into a stern arrangement of lines and angles, hardened by years of war reporting. Behind his pale eyes flickered a kind of constant calculation, the gaze of a man trained to observe, to notice what others missed. In the inner pocket of his worn coat, he kept a small leather-bound notebook, battered and overstuffed with observations and secrets. Washington was celebrating, but Elias didn't trust the sound of cheers echoing down the streets. He'd learned, long ago, that truth rarely marched in the open during wartime. And now, as peace tiptoed its way back, truth had only crawled deeper underground. His boarding house on F Street looked like every other building on the block, drab, quiet, forgettable. That was intentional. Anonymity was worth more than gold to a man like Elias. His underground pamphlet, The Honest Witness, had exposed scandals, corruption, and profiteering all through the war, and it had earned him both a loyal following and a long list of enemies. Yet the paper kept circulating, hand to hand, read in whispers beneath the noses of those he called out by name. As he climbed the narrow creaking stairs to his rented room, he muttered under his breath, "The war may be ending, but the real fighting's just beginning." The room was small, almost monkish. No decorations, just function. Papers blanketed every surface, scrawled notes, letters from informants, clipped headlines. In the far corner, a small hand-cranked printing press waited like a coiled spring. It had churned out hundreds of copies in a single night before, and Elias was ready to do it again. He lit his oil lamp, the warm glow making the walls twitch with soft, flickering shadows. Reaching beneath a loose floorboard, he pulled out his latest draft and read the bold headline aloud. "Serpents in the cabinet, Lincoln surrounded by traitors." Even for Elias, it was a gutsy claim, but the pieces were falling into place. Dark rumors, strange disappearances, hushed meetings behind, locked doors. 3 quick knocks broke his concentration, then a pause, then 2 more. The signal. He opened the door just a crack, enough to see a gaunt man in a Union officer's coat, wrinkled and stained. Colonel James Simmons. His eyes looked hollow, and the grime on his face suggested he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't be here," Elias whispered, pulling him inside and locking the door behind them. "We agreed on Harper's Ferry. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow might be too late," Simmons said hoarsely. He removed his cap, revealing a shock of grey hair that hadn't been there 6 months ago. His hands trembled as he looked around the room, as if half expecting someone to leap out from the shadows. Elias poured him a drink without a word. Simmons downed the whiskey in one desperate gulp, then set the glass down with a quiet clink. "Something's happening, Finch. Something big." "What? Another stolen arms contract? Some other supply chain vanishing into smoke?" Simmons shook his head. "It's not about money this time. It's about control. Power. Who holds it now that the bullets have stopped flying?" He leaned forward, voice low, urgent. "Lincoln's made too many enemies. The South wants him dead. Some of his own generals say he's gone soft. Even the radicals in his party think he's a barrier, not a leader. Elias nodded slowly, but his stomach twisted. None of that's new, James. We both know he's walking a tightrope. No, Simmons said, gripping Elias's wrist. You're not hearing me. It's worse. Much worse. There are meetings happening, private ones. Men from the military, from Lincoln's own cabinet, even the bankers. They're talking about a transition, a shift, something they're calling necessary, quiet, coordinated. Elias's heart thudded in his chest. I need names, he said. Give me names. Simmons rubbed his face. I don't have all of them, but I saw something. Symbols, not military, not official. A phoenix rising from flames. On rings, on pins. Secretive. He hesitated, then said, Stanton. Secretary Stanton. He's in it somehow. I'm sure of it. Elias's pen was already scratching across the page. Edwin Stanton. Secretary of War. Inner circle. Phoenix symbol. Not standard insignia. Simmons stood, eyes darting toward the window. Watch the Treasury building tomorrow night, he said. Midnight. Back entrance. See for yourself who comes and goes. He pulled on his coat and turned to leave. Be careful who you trust, Finch, he added quietly. This war made strange bedfellows. Some of them haven't crawled back out. After the door clicked shut behind him, Elias couldn't sit still. He paced his room like a caged animal, thoughts racing in every direction. Stanton? Could it be true? He'd always thought of the man as ruthless, but patriotic. Brutal, but effective. Could someone like him really be plotting against the president? The colonel hadn't looked like a man selling a lie. He looked haunted. As night settled over the capital, Elias pulled on his coat, tucked his notebook deep into his inner pocket, and slipped out into the dark. The Washington that emerged after sundown was different. The streets, now slick with evening mist, seemed to hum with secrets. Gas lamps glowed like watchful eyes. Footsteps echoed louder. Voices fell to whispers. He kept to side streets, avoiding patrols and revelers. The spring breeze carried everything. Music from a bar, laughter from a window, the sharp edge of an argument in an alley. The city was bleeding emotion, not all of it joy. The wounds of war were still fresh. Not every soldier had come home whole, and not every home was waiting with open arms. Near Lafayette Square, he stopped. 3 black carriages rolled past, slow and silent. No markings, no lanterns. Their windows were covered with thick curtains. The wheels made barely a sound against the cobblestones. Elias stepped back into a doorway, hidden in the shadows, and watched. They didn't take the road toward the White House. They turned off, heading toward the Treasury building. They moved with eerie precision, the 3 black carriages gliding down the cobbled street like a procession of silent predators. Not a hoof clattered, not a wheel squeaked. The drivers didn't speak or gesture, just stared ahead, faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. It was the kind of movement Elias had only ever seen in military units trained for stealth. As they passed beneath the glow of a gas lamp, a faint shimmer caught Elias's eye on the lead carriage's door, a small emblem almost invisible in the dim light. He squinted. A bird, wings outstretched, its feathers rising in stylized flames. A phoenix. He instinctively stepped back into the shadows of a nearby alley, letting them pass, then followed at a cautious distance, his boots muffled by the wet spring ground. The carriages didn't head toward the main gates. Instead, they slipped through a narrow side entrance of the White House grounds, one rarely used and barely guarded. A figure stepped out to meet them. Tall, with a thick beard and a rigid stance. Even from across the street, Elias recognized the unmistakable profile. Secretary Edwin Stanton, the man who had run the war machine with cold precision. Stanton looked both alert and grim, nodding once as he welcomed the arrivals before disappearing with them inside. Elias pulled out his notebook and, by the faint light of a street lamp, jotted down the time. 11:17 p.m. The next morning, headlines exploded across the city. General Lee surrenders at Appomattox. The war is over. Washington went mad with joy. Parades broke out spontaneously on Pennsylvania Avenue. Champagne corks popped in every tavern and on every doorstep. Soldiers hugged civilians. Civilians hugged strangers. People wept in the streets. Some from joy, others from exhaustion. But under all the noise, Elias felt something else stirring. A strange pressure, like the air before a storm. He could feel it in the glances exchanged between men in suits, in the way conversations dropped to whispers when he entered a room. Celebration on the surface, but beneath it, plans, secrets. That night, he waited, bundled in a heavy coat, hat pulled low, collar turned up against the crisp air. Elias positioned himself in the alley across from the back entrance of the Treasury building. The service door sat in shadow, unnoticed by most, but he knew what it was. At precisely midnight, the first carriage rolled up, then another, then more. They were all unmarked, private, no government seals, curtains drawn tight over the windows. One after another, they came. 12 in total. The men who stepped out didn't linger. They moved quickly, their faces either hidden by hats or turned away. But Elias knew faces. He'd studied them for years. There, a Supreme Court justice, then 2 generals, and, God help him, Vice President Andrew Johnson. Each man slipped inside without a word. The last carriage was smaller and slower. When its door opened, Elias's breath caught. Senator Lafayette Baker, head of the National Detective Police, Lincoln's personal spy master. There was no mistaking him, not with that rigid posture, that sharp, calculating stare. Even in the flickering gaslight, the man radiated danger. But what made Elias's blood truly run cold was the pin glinting from Baker's lapel, a phoenix, rising from flames. Baker paused at the door. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared out into the shadows of the alley, his eyes scanning the darkness like a man sensing something just out of reach. Elias held his breath, unmoving. After a long moment, Baker turned and stepped inside. Elias stayed in his hiding spot for hours, the cold seeping into his bones, a dull ache spreading through his legs. But he didn't dare leave, not yet, not until he knew. When the men finally emerged, it was nearly 3 a.m. Their expressions were tight, unreadable. No laughter, no conversation, just sharp nods and purposeful steps as they returned to their waiting carriages and disappeared one by one into the night. Whatever had been decided in that room, it wouldn't be written in any official record. That much was clear. Back in his room, Elias moved like a man possessed. He scrawled notes furiously, piecing fragments together. His fingers trembled as he sketched the emblem, an elegant phoenix, flames licking at its wings. Below it, he wrote, "The Order of the Phoenix, secret society or military faction." The first light of morning crept in through the warped window pane, casting pale streaks across the cluttered floor. Outside, the calls of the newsboys echoed up the street. Victory. Complete. Lincoln to attend Ford's Theatre tomorrow night. Elias froze. Ford's Theatre. Simmons' warning rang in his ears. Something big is about to happen. He looked at his notes. Stanton at the White House. Secret midnight meetings. The Phoenix. Insignia. Vice President Johnson among them. And now, Baker, the president's own spy chief. A sick feeling twisted in his gut. He didn't know exactly what was coming, but he knew one thing beyond a doubt. He had to be at that theatre. April 14th dawned clear and calm. It was Good Friday, and Washington buzzed with a kind of spiritual relief, as if the entire nation were taking its first full breath in 4 years. Flags fluttered from every building. Church bells rang throughout the city, not in mourning this time, but in celebration. Elias spent the morning chasing whispers, darting between print shops and back rooms of taverns, asking the wrong questions to the right people. When he mentioned the Order of the Phoenix, some men shrugged. Others froze. One barkeep glanced nervously toward the door and said nothing at all. That silence spoke louder than words. By mid-afternoon, Elias had what he needed, a ticket to Our American Cousin at Ford's Theatre. It cost him most of the cash in his pocket, and a favor he couldn't afford to owe, but he got it. He'd never liked theatre, especially not lightweight comedies, but tonight wasn't about entertainment. As the sun began to set behind the Capitol Dome, Elias dressed with more care than he had in years, no ink-stained shirt or frayed collar tonight. He wore a modest but clean suit, a navy cravat, and freshly polished boots. Just enough to blend in among the city's elite, but not enough to stand out. He checked his revolver once, then again. It was small, a last resort. He'd never needed to carry one before, but something told him this wasn't a night for taking chances. Slipping it into a hidden pocket beneath his coat, he took one last look around his room. The ink-stained desk, the notes on the wall, the little press in the corner. He had the distinct, unsettling feeling that when he returned, if he returned, nothing would be the same. But something about tonight felt off. As Elias stepped onto 10th Street, Ford's Theatre glowed under the gaslight like a beacon. The 3-story brick structure had seen many grand evenings since its renovation 2 years ago, but this night felt different, almost too polished, too proud. Official Washington had shown up in force. You could feel the energy in the air, eager conversations, quick laughter, and the clatter of carriages pulling up one after another. Victory hung thick like perfume, and the president himself was here, to crown the moment. Elias scanned the entrance as he walked closer. There were a few city police loitering about, mostly chatting among themselves, but nothing that resembled serious protection. No military detail, no tightened security. It didn't sit right with him. The war had just ended. Lincoln had enemies, and yet the crowd was left to swirl freely under the soft watch of half-interested officers. He took his time watching people filter in, faces he recognized from newspapers and formal dinners, congressmen, generals, lobbyists, the usual mix of influence and ambition. They smiled, laughed, posed. It all felt like a play inside a play, everyone performing. Inside the lobby, lit warmly by gas sconces, Elias caught sight of a familiar face. John Frederick Parker, Lincoln's bodyguard, though that title sounded more flattering than factual. Parker had a reputation, and not a good one. His drinking habits were whispered about even in polite company. Tonight, the man looked bored, his gaze drifting toward the bar across the street as though already halfway to his first drink. Elias frowned. He made a mental note, filing it away like a good journalist does. He found his seat in the dress circle, one level below the presidential box. Perfect view, not just of the stage, but of the narrow hallway that led to Lincoln's private seating. From here, he could watch the play and the players behind the curtain of real power. The theatre buzzed with anticipation. Women fanned themselves gently, the rustle of silk skirts blending with the quiet murmur of political gossip. Men leaned, close to each other, voices low and eyes sharp. Then, at precisely 8:30, a hush fell over the crowd. A stir began near the main entrance. The orchestra struck the first notes of "Hail to the Chief." All eyes turned as Abraham Lincoln stepped inside, tall, thin, stooped slightly in his black suit. Mary walked beside him, her gloved hand resting on his arm. Behind them followed Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. The audience rose, applause echoing off the curved walls. Lincoln gave a small bow, a weary smile tugging at the edges of his face. That look, kind, sad, and distant all at once, lingered as he took his seat. The play began. Our American Cousin. Laughter filled the air, timed with the actors' lines. But Elias only half listened. His eyes kept scanning the crowd, the doorways, the faces. Roughly 20 minutes into the performance, Someone new entered the dress circle. A man in a dark coat, moving with a familiarity that stood out. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. He belonged. Elias's stomach turned. Even in partial profile, he recognized him. John Wilkes Booth. The actor's face was striking, dark, handsome, and marked by that unmistakable theatrical arrogance. People knew him, admired him. That made what Elias saw next all the more jarring. Near the rear wall, a Union officer intercepted Booth briefly. His uniform was crisp, his bearing composed. The insignia on his shoulder marked him as a staff colonel. They spoke, quick, hushed words. The officer pressed something small into Booth's palm. A flash of silver, maybe. Elias leaned forward instinctively. Booth pocketed it in one fluid motion, barely breaking stride. The exchange lasted no more than 10 seconds. Then the officer turned away, heading toward the stairwell. Elias's pulse quickened. He rose quietly, determined to follow the officer, but something caught his eye. A symbol on the man's collar. A small phoenix emblem. Elias froze. He'd seen that exact insignia on Senator Baker's lapel the previous week. Odd for a military man to wear it. He turned back toward Booth. Too late. Booth had reached the hallway leading to the presidential box. He paused just outside it, glanced around. No sign of Parker. The bodyguard was gone, maybe at the bar, maybe nowhere. Booth stepped forward and slipped inside. Elias stood up. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. Then, a gunshot, sharp, deafening, followed by a high panicked scream. Mary Lincoln's voice, unmistakable. Gasps, shouts, screams. And there on the stage, Booth appeared again, leaping from the box to the floor. His boot caught in the Treasury Guard's flag draped below the president's seat. He landed awkwardly, stumbled, but rose fast, a knife in one hand. "Sic semper tyrannis," he shouted. Thus always to tyrants. The theatre exploded into chaos. Women fainted. Men ducked or rushed forward. Panic surged like a tide. Someone screamed, "The president is shot!" Elias stared at the box. Lincoln was slumped in his chair, unmoving, head tilted, a dark stain blooming at his collar. Mary was clutching at him, crying out, her voice broken. Rathbone stood in shock, his arm bleeding where Booth had slashed him. But Elias focused on what others missed. Booth's exit, too smooth. The back door, conveniently unguarded. A horse tied just outside, waiting. The hesitation of the guards, too long, too rehearsed. And then, the most chilling sight of all, the Union colonel with the phoenix pin, standing in the shadows near a side exit, watching, calm, still. And then, just like that, he disappeared into the dark. Elias remained rooted, notebook forgotten, in his coat pocket, heart pounding as the truth began to form in his mind. Not just of an assassination, but of a plan, a conspiracy wrapped in uniforms and sealed with silence. Not in pursuit of Booth, but in the opposite direction. Elias shoved through the swarm of terrified theatre-goers, not toward the stage, but to the side exit near the back alley. He barely registered the screams behind him, the sobs, the frantic calls for a doctor. His focus was razor-sharp. The colonel, the man with the phoenix pin, that moment with Booth. He had to find him. When Elias burst out into the cool night air, the alley was nearly empty. The scent of horse dung and kerosene hung thick. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. His eyes darted through the shadows, searching. Gone. The colonel had vanished. But not everyone had. A stagehand, young, maybe 20, was standing near the stage door, trembling and rambling to no one in particular. Booth. It was John Wilkes Booth. I swear it. I saw his face. He just ran, like the devil was chasing him. Elias grabbed the boy's shoulder, turning him hard. "The man who spoke to Booth," he demanded, panting. "The officer. Did you see where he went? The boy blinked at him, confused. What officer? The Union Colonel, Elias said, more urgently now. He was right here, not even a minute ago. The stagehand shook his head. Mister, I don't know what you're talking about. There weren't no officers back here, just that actor. He was muttering to himself, then ran off like he was on fire. Elias stared into the boy's frightened eyes, then turned back to the alley. Empty. It was as if the colonel had slipped between the cracks of the night and disappeared. From inside the theatre, chaos bled into the street. Shouts for help. Someone calling desperately for soldiers, another for a doctor. A woman wailed. Elias turned back toward 10th Street and moved fast, melting into the wave of civilians and soldiers now converging on the building. His thoughts spun. Lincoln had been shot. Booth was clearly the trigger man. But everything else, the small object passed to him. The absent guard, the waiting horse, the officer, calm, composed, unhurried. None of it felt random. None of it felt like the work of a single madman acting on impulse. By midnight, Washington no longer felt like itself. Soldiers now patrolled every corner. Patrols barked orders. Carriage wheels clicked frantically against cobblestones. A crowd had gathered outside the Peterson house, just across the street from Ford's, where Lincoln had been carried. Doctors were inside trying to save him, but from the way people spoke in hushed tones, the outlook was grim. Rumors flew through the crowd like startled crows. They stabbed Seward too, right in his own bed. I heard the vice president was attacked. They're saying it's Confederate agents, maybe hundreds in the city. Elias moved among them, scribbling in his notebook. Not just the words, but the tones, the expressions. He was used to sorting truth from panic. But tonight, it was harder than usual. People were terrified, yes, but some of the fear seemed directed not outward, but inward, like they sensed something deeper had shifted. Shortly before 1 a.m., a hush fell over the crowd. A carriage stopped near the Peterson house. Secretary Stanton stepped down, surrounded by aides and soldiers. His jaw was tight, face pale and rigid with rage. He didn't pause. He pushed forward with the urgency of a man who had no time for anything but control. And there, walking just behind him, was the colonel, the same one, the same insignia, the same cold composure. The phoenix pin gleamed openly now on his collar, no longer hidden. Their eyes locked. For a second, just a second, Elias saw into him. The colonel didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His stare was hard, analytical, and unmistakably threatening. A warning passed silently in that moment. Then the colonel turned, disappeared behind Stanton, and vanished into the house where Abraham Lincoln was dying. Elias stood there, motionless, as the city held its breath. By dawn, the president was gone. The bells of Washington tolled like a funeral dirge across the rooftops. Lincoln had surrendered to his wound, and the country woke up to the weight of it. Black crepe appeared on balconies. Clergymen rang bells. Women cried openly in the streets. Men stood outside newspaper offices, reading bulletins as fast as printers could post them. Elias wandered through it all like a ghost. His pen barely paused. His hands moved, but his mind raced. Every headline told the same story. Booth, Confederate sympathizer, acts alone. No mention of the officer who handed Booth something. No mention of Parker, the missing guard. No mention of how Booth had slipped past everyone and into the most guarded seat in the nation. The facts had been replaced, sanitized, arranged like theatre props. Before Lincoln's body was even cold, the script had already been written. Elias knew better. That look from the colonel, that calm withdrawal, it wasn't improvisation. It was choreography. A final act written in blood, and no one wanted the rest of the story. Later that morning, Elias pushed open the familiar wooden door of a modest print shop on East Street. The scent of ink and old paper greeted him. Behind, the counter, Herr Müller, the German printer who had helped publish The Honest Witness through the war, looked up. The old man's expression was grave. I need a front page, Elias said, pulling his notes from his coat, something that's not in the morning editions. But Mueller was already shaking his head. I cannot print for you any more, Herr Finch, he said quietly, voice heavy with regret. What? Why not? They came this morning. Government men. Elias froze. Who? Mueller's hands trembled slightly as he rearranged type that didn't need rearranging. They asked questions, took copies of everything, said I must not print anything not cleared, told me to burn anything unapproved. Elias stared at him, heart sinking. We print the truth, he said. The old man met his gaze, and for a moment something flickered there. Sadness, fear, guilt. Not anymore, Mueller whispered. They were asking about you, Mueller said, voice low, barely above a whisper. And about your pamphlet. They took my customer ledger. Elias leaned in. Did they threaten you? Mueller glanced nervously at the window, then shook his head. They didn't have to. One of them looked at me like a man who's already decided what to break. And not just things, Elias. Things that don't get fixed. Elias felt his stomach tighten. What exactly did they say? They said the country needs unity now, not troublemakers. Then one of them walked over to the printing press, ran his hand across it real slow and said, Beautiful machine. Shame if anything happened to it. He hesitated, eyes flicking again to the window. Then he added, or to your immigration papers. Elias's fists clenched. That old familiar heat bloomed in his chest. I need to print what I saw, Heinrich. The truth about Fords. People deserve to know. Not here you won't, Mueller replied sharply. He looked around the shop, then pressed a cold brass key into Elias's palm. Back room of Kennedy's tobacco shop. My brother's old press is still there. Dusty, but it works. It's yours, if you're sure. Their eyes met. Mueller's voice dropped. But be careful, Elias. These are dangerous times. Truth doesn't matter to powerful men. Survival does. By late afternoon, Elias was hunched over the press at Kennedy's. The room smelled of tobacco and machine oil. Dust danced in the shafts of amber light coming through the grimy window. The press was smaller than he was used to and decades out of date, but its gears turned smooth and obedient. He sorted his notes with trembling fingers. Half-formed sentences and the weight of consequences swirled in his head when a knock came at the door. Elias froze. His hand went to the revolver in his coat pocket. A woman's voice, calm but urgent. Mr. Finch. Adelaide Booker. I was at Ford's last night. He cracked the door. Adelaide stood in the hallway, her coat too thin for the weather, her eyes ringed with worry. He opened the door wider. Come in. They had spoken before, briefly, when he'd written a piece on wartime performers. She was a skilled seamstress who'd worked at the theatre for years. She didn't waste time. I saw you last night, following that officer, the one with the strange pin. Elias's breath caught. What did you see? I was backstage, mending a curtain. Booth came in first. He was fidgety, kept checking his pocket watch. Then, the officer came through the stage door, which never happens. That entrance is for performers and crew. Her voice dropped. They spoke briefly. The officer gave Booth something. Small, metallic. I couldn't see it clearly. She paused, lowering her voice further. Then I heard the officer say, Remember, wait for the laugh line in Act 3, Scene 2. Not before. Then he left, the way he came. Elias leaned forward. Could you recognize this officer? She hesitated, then nodded. Colonel Atticus Wade. He's been to the theatre before, always asking about the layout, who sits where, how the crowd moves. I thought he was just a theatre buff. She pulled her shawl tighter, voice trembling now. I shouldn't be here. My sister says men have been asking questions about everyone who was working that night. Elias didn't press her further. He knew she'd already risked too much. After she left, he got to work. Words poured from his pen, His memory, her account, the details others might try to bury. By midnight, the first run of his pamphlet was done. 200 copies. The truth, or at least a crack in the silence. He wrapped the bundles and stepped into the cold alley behind the shop. That's when he saw it. A shape pulled away from the shadows. His hand went to his revolver. "I wouldn't, Finch." The voice was low, calm, familiar. Colonel Simmons stepped into the pale yellow light of the gas lamp. His uniform was perfect. His face was unreadable. "There are 3 rifles trained on you right now," he added, almost gently. Elias didn't move. "You said something big was coming. You knew." "I suspected," Simmons replied. "There's a difference." He nodded toward the bundle of pamphlets under Elias's arm. "Those won't go anywhere. The city's on lockdown. Every street corner has a man watching." Elias's jaw tightened. "Since when do you care about suppressing the truth?" Simmons sighed, as if burdened by the weight of his own words. "Since Secretary Stanton declared martial law an hour ago. The official line is, Booth acted with Confederate conspirators. Any other version threatens national security. We're holding the country together with pins and twine, Elias. This isn't the time for loose ends." Elias stared at him. "You're part of it. The Order of the Phoenix." Simmons blinked, just once. A flicker. "That name isn't spoken. Not now." He stepped closer. His voice dropped. "Listen to me. What's done is done. Lincoln was too lenient. The South won't yield to kindness. It has to be broken, completely. The Phoenix knows this." "And Booth?" Elias asked, his voice shaking with rage. "Just a puppet?" "A patriot," Simmons said. "One we nudged. He thought he was serving the Confederacy. In truth, he served something larger." He looked away, just for a moment, and when he looked back, there was something almost human in his expression. The country needed a villain. "Now we can rebuild it stronger." Elias's voice was hoarse. "Stanton, Wade, Baker, how far does this go?" Simmons didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out. Elias didn't take it right away. "What is it?" "Something to keep you alive," Simmons said. "If you still want to be. This was left for you," Simmons had said, handing Elias the folded paper before disappearing into the night. "I'd burn it after reading." Elias unwrapped the slip carefully, shielding it from the breeze as he read the 5 lines written. "In elegant, flowing script, the Phoenix rises from necessary fire. What seems an ending is merely transformation. Those who see too clearly become blinded. E.F. Choose wisely where blindness falls." April 16th, midnight. Congressional Cemetery. Hamilton plot. When Elias looked up, Simmons was gone. The alley stretched, out empty in both directions. Only a stray dog nosed through scattered trash near the far wall. Above, the stars had vanished behind thick, moving clouds. The wind carried the bite of oncoming rain. He walked the rest of the way home, with his hand never straying far from his coat pocket, where the revolver lay cold and still. Something had shifted. The city felt like a stage after the curtains had closed, dark, artificial, and filled with hidden watchers. Back at his lodgings, he unlocked the door and instantly knew. Someone had been inside. Not burglars. Professionals. Drawers were slightly ajar, papers rearranged with eerie precision. The mattress had been slit open at the seam. 2 floorboards near the writing desk were pried loose and hastily replaced. His latest notes, his full account of the night at Ford's, Adelaide's testimony, were gone. A newspaper sat unfolded on his desk, too neatly placed to be coincidence. The ink was still slightly damp. Adelaide Booker, seamstress at Ford's Theatre, tragically took her own life this evening. Miss Booker, said to be overcome with grief after witnessing the president's assassination, was found in her boarding room. The paragraph blurred as Elias stared. He could feel the cold sweat begin to form at the base of his neck. Adelaide had been steady, calm. She had known the risks and had come to him anyway. Whatever had happened to her, it wasn't suicide. He was a warning. The message rang out as clear as a gunshot. Witnesses disappear. Words can be erased. For the next 24 hours, Elias moved through a city under quiet occupation. Soldiers manned newly raised checkpoints at key intersections. Men in civilian coats, but with rigid spines and eyes that scanned everything, stood on corners, feigning casual loitering. Elias had reported on enough military matters to recognize them for what they were: undercover agents, detectives, enforcers. The newspapers were all the same. Identical language, down to the commas. Every column told the same tale. John Wilkes, Booth, unhinged Confederate sympathizer, had murdered the president in a final act of Southern vengeance. But Elias noticed what no one was meant to. There was movement, but little progress. Streets crawled with activity, but no real pursuit. Booth's name was shouted, posted, plastered across the city, but the search felt staged, loud for the public, but hollow beneath. On the night of April 16th, rain fell in slow, steady drops. As Elias made his way to Congressional Cemetery, his coat collar turned up against the wind. The sky was a dull bruise, and the trees along the cemetery path rustled restlessly. He found the Hamilton plot easily enough. A tall, pale obelisk marking the grave of a long-dead congressman no one remembered. He took cover behind a nearby mausoleum, keeping the revolver in hand, eyes on the path. Midnight arrived with a single chime from a distant clock tower. A black carriage appeared from the gloom, the wheels soft on the wet gravel. It stopped with practiced silence. The door opened. A single figure stepped out, carrying a lantern, tall, broad-shouldered. Even with his coat drawn tight and the rain soaking his hat, Elias recognized him instantly. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Second, only to the president in influence, now perhaps the most powerful man in America. Mr. Finch, Stanton called, his voice composed, cutting clearly through the rain. I know you're here. Let's dispense with theatrics. If I wanted you dead, you would be. Elias stepped into view, revolver still in hand. Like Adelaide. Booker! Stanton didn't blink. Regrettable, but necessary. Some people cannot adjust to changing circumstances. His tone was matter-of-fact, almost cold, but his eyes, sharp and unreadable, studied Elias with surgical precision. You, I believe, are more pragmatic. Is that why I'm here? Elias asked. To be bought? To be offered perspective, Stanton said simply. He set the lantern on a nearby grave. The soft glow made the rain glisten on his coat like a second skin. What do you think you... No, Mr. Finch. I know Lincoln was killed by a conspiracy, Elias said, stepping closer. I know the Order of the Phoenix orchestrated it. I know you're part of it. Stanton nodded slowly, as though accepting a student's incomplete answer. Not inaccurate, he said, but not complete. He folded his arms. The Phoenix is not a cabal of madmen. We're not tyrants. We're patriots. Realists. Sometimes the body must be cut to be saved. Elias's voice was low. And Lincoln was what? A tumor? Stanton's expression shifted, not softened, but saddened. He was an obstacle. A good man, yes, but soft. Too soft for what the country needs now. He would have rebuilt the South with open arms, forgiven the very men who turned their guns on us, and in 10 years, they'd be back in power, smiling, rich and unpunished. Elias felt a deep chill settle in his gut, the kind that had nothing to do with the rain. So you had him killed, Stanton corrected him without pause. We had him removed, quietly, with dignity, for the greater good. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Now, Reconstruction will be handled properly. The South will be reshaped by strength, not sentiment. You sound like a tyrant. I sound like someone who understands history, Stanton replied. It's written by the victors and shaped by the ones. Holding the pen, you could be one of them. Elias stared, repulsed. You want me to spread your story, rewrite the truth. I want you to survive, Stanton said flatly. Your talents are known. The pamphlet was well done, but dangerous. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather portfolio, thick and worn, sealed with a red ribbon. You don't need to agree with us, but you need to understand where the lines are now. You speak too freely, you die. You speak wisely, and perhaps you help guide this nation. Elias didn't take it right away. And if I refuse? Stanton's eyes narrowed just slightly. Then the next obituary won't be about a seamstress. Inside the worn leather portfolio was everything. A commission naming Elias Finch, a special correspondent to the War Department, and enough forged documents to imply he'd been working for them all along. The message was crystal clear. He could either accept their version of history or be erased from it completely. Stanton laid the portfolio atop the grave marker, his gloved hand lingering for just a second. Then he turned and walked back toward the waiting carriage. Before stepping inside, he paused beneath the downpour. One day, he said softly, when the anger fades and the wounds scab over, the truth might be allowed to surface. But not now, not for decades. The rain crashed down harder, nearly drowning out his final words. Choose wisely, Mr. Finch. By tomorrow, there won't be another choice left. Rain battered Washington for 3 unrelenting days after Stanton's ultimatum, as if the sky itself mourned Lincoln. Elias remained in the shadows, a fugitive in his own city. He drifted from safe house to safe house, places known only to the tight web of informants and dissenters he'd cultivated during the war. The portfolio, Stanton's quiet threat, remained unopened inside his overcoat. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than papers, like it carried surrender. On the third night, thunder rattled the city like cannon fire. In the damp, musty cellar of a church near the Navy Yard, Elias met with Muller. The minister who ran the church had once patched up wounded Confederates in secret. The scent of old blood and incense still clung to the stone. The papers say, "Booth's gone south," Muller said, pulling off his soaked coat and shaking rain from his hat. "But I heard different. My cousin drives supply wagons. Said the soldiers tore up the Surat boarding house again today. Ripped up floorboards, busted down walls. They're looking for something," Elias muttered, half to himself. "Either something Booth left, or something they left behind and need to retrieve." Muller hesitated before speaking. "There are whispers about a diary." Elias's head snapped up. "A diary? Booth kept one." "So they say." Small, red leather, journal, supposedly filled with his thoughts, his plans, names too, maybe even orders. That hit Elias like a jolt. A diary like that would blow open the story. It wouldn't just be evidence. It would be a confession, a roadmap. It could show Booth hadn't acted alone. That Stanton and others, men still shaping the future, were pulling the strings behind the scenes. "Where did you hear this?" "A clerk at the War Department," Miller replied. "He was drunk at Hannigan's Tavern. Said Stanton personally ordered the boarding house to be combed through again. Said the man looked like he'd seen a ghost." That told Elias everything. If Booth had written down names, especially names like Wade, Baker, or Stanton himself, it would tear the lone assassin narrative to shreds. "I need to get into that boarding house," Elias said, eyes sharp with resolve. "Impossible," Muller shot back. "They've got it locked up. Guards 24/7. Elias offered a half smile. Nothing's impossible, just inconvenient. He hadn't spent the war building a network of spies and mapping the city's every hidden corner for nothing. "What about the old tunnel entrances?" he asked. "Are any still open?" Muller stared at him. "You mean the smuggling tunnels?" "Exactly. Some, maybe. But most haven't been used since the early war days. They're dangerous, collapsed, flooded. I'll manage." Washington's underbelly was a world few knew existed. Beneath old buildings near the Navy Yard and along the Potomac, A spiderweb of tunnels once moved arms, medicine, people. Most had been sealed or lost to time, but Elias had documented them meticulously for a story he never dared publish. That night, armed with only a crude hand-drawn map from an old notebook and his memory, Elias slipped through the streets like a shadow and descended into the city's forgotten veins. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in an abandoned warehouse cellar. A rusted iron door groaned as he pried it open, revealing blackness thick with the scent of mildew and rot. His lantern flickered to life, casting strange, dancing shadows along the narrow brick corridor. Water dripped somewhere, echoing like footsteps. He moved carefully, counting turns, measuring his steps. He could feel the weight of the earth pressing in from all sides. The air was damp, suffocating, thick with decay. Nearly an hour passed before he reached a point that should place him directly beneath H Street, under the Surat boarding house. A rusted metal ladder clung to the wall, vanishing into darkness. Above, Elias extinguished his lantern and climbed slowly, one rung at a time. When he reached the top, he pushed gently against a trapdoor and emerged into what looked like an old storage cellar. Dust lay undisturbed across crates and shelves, except for one detail. A single set of boot prints marked the ground, stopping near the far wall. Elias crept toward them, heart hammering. He crouched by the wall, running his fingers across the bricks. There, a slight change in colour. The mortar between a few bricks looked newer, different. Someone had been here. Someone had hidden something. Using the small blade from his pocket knife, Elias carefully scraped at the fresh mortar, the gritty material flaking away beneath his steady hand. After several minutes of careful work, a brick loosened. He pried it free. The sound muffled in the quiet cellar. Reaching into the dark cavity, his fingers brushed something soft. Leather, worn smooth by time. His breath caught in his throat. Gently, he pulled it out. A small red book, plain, unmarked, and slightly warm from where it had been hidden. Elias turned it over in his hands, heart pounding. This had to be it. With cautious fingers, he cracked it open. The pages were filled with a sharp, elegant script, almost theatrical in its flourish. Booth's diary. It had been hidden with care, likely by Booth himself, or maybe someone had told him exactly where to hide it. Elias tucked it deep inside his coat and made his way back through the tunnel, the damp air seeming to close in tighter with every step. Back in the church cellar, safe for the moment, Elias lit a lantern and finally took the time to read. What he found surprised him. The diary wasn't a confession in the traditional sense. It was a rambling, chaotic collection of justifications, fantasies, and delusions. Booth saw himself as a tragic hero, Brutus reborn, who had struck down, a tyrant to avenge the South. He wrote like a man consumed by his own myth. Still, hidden among the self-glorifying nonsense were chilling fragments of a broader plan. One entry from mid-March read, "Met with W again. He assures me that once it is done, I will be hailed as a hero throughout the South. Arrangements for escape are secured. I must follow the route exactly, each stop, each contact, as planned." The tone was calm, rehearsed. Not the words of a madman acting alone. Another entry, dated April 2nd, was more troubling. "The order has promised my legacy. Their influence reaches high, too high to name. Men who move entire nations with ink and whispers. They say fire will purify, that a reborn America will rise from the ashes. I am to be the spark." Elias sat back, stunned. He turned the pages slowly, dreading what might come next. And then he found it. Dated April 13th, the day before Lincoln's assassination. Final meeting with CW. He gave me the Derringer and confirmed the cue. Act 3, Scene 2, during the laugh line. The guard will be gone. Arranged. I expressed worry about escaping through the crowd. He assured me certain doors would be clear. Gave me a token, a bronze phoenix rising from flame, to show those helping me. A bronze phoenix. Elias's fingers trembled as he read the entry again. That symbol, it was real, not a metaphor. A physical token passed between co-conspirators. He read through the night, mind racing, piecing together clues. The diary never named the order of the phoenix directly, but its hand was visible in every arrangement, every coincidence that had aided Booth's plot. The escape route, the missing guard, the cleared doors. It had all been orchestrated. Ford's theatre hadn't just been a backdrop, it had been a stage in every sense, prepared by men in the shadows. But the questions multiplied. Who was CW? Could it be Colonel Wade? What of these unnamed men at the highest levels? Stanton's name loomed large, but the web extended beyond him. The diary hinted at bankers who had grown rich from war, foreign powers uneasy about Lincoln's Reconstruction plans, and radical Republicans who had deemed the president too conciliatory toward the South. By sunrise, Elias knew what he had to do. He began drafting immediately, The Murder of the Republic. For 3 sleepless days, Elias hid in a sympathetic bookstore, scribbling notes by lamplight, cross-referencing Booth's diary with events he'd witnessed firsthand and the strange silences of government officials in the days after Lincoln's death. Names began to form a list in his mind. Edwin Stanton, the strategist coordinating the cleanup. Colonel Atticus Wade, the enforcer, the man behind CW. Lafayette Baker, the detective, controlling what truth was allowed to surface. 3 cabinet members whom Elias suspected based on their sudden, inexplicable policy shifts after the assassination. He pulled no punches. He included diagrams of Booth's escape route, annotations from the diary, newspaper clippings, everything that could tie the pieces together. Then, on the morning of April 24th, as Elias was preparing the final chapter, news tore through Washington. John Wilkes Booth had been found, cornered in a tobacco barn in Virginia, they said, shot and killed by a soldier, against orders. The official story was that he refused to surrender. The reality smelled of something else entirely. A silencing. The only man who might have confirmed Elias's findings, gone in a blaze. No trial, no interrogation, just ashes. Convenient. Elias worked through the night, heart racing, pens scrawling faster than ever. He added a final section to the pamphlet, a scathing postscript dissecting the suspicious nature of Booth's death, the destroyed chance to interrogate him, and the questions that would now go unanswered forever. As dawn broke over a rain-slick Washington on April 25th, 200 copies of The Murder of the Republic sat stacked and ready in the bookstore's back room. Elias looked at the fresh pages, his fingers still stained with ink. He wasn't sure how long he had before someone came looking for him. But the truth was out there now. And for Elias Finch, that had always been the only cause worth dying for. The ink was barely dry. Elias Finch hadn't even gotten the chance to release the documents before the door exploded inward, splinters flying through the air like wooden shrapnel. It was just after sunrise. 6 men stormed into his tiny, cluttered study. They wore plain clothes, no badges, no markings, but they moved with the precision of trained soldiers. Their weapons were drawn, their faces were blank. No questions, no confusion. They knew exactly who they were here for. Elias froze mid-step, heart pounding in his chest. The leader stepped forward. Elias recognized him immediately. Lafayette Baker, the head of the National Detective Police. The same man who had supposedly been leading the hunt for John Wilkes Booth. His presence made one thing clear. This wasn't just a routine arrest. This was political. Elias Finch, Baker said coldly. You are under arrest for sedition and for interfering with a military investigation. Elias had known this might happen. He'd prepared, had a plan. But now that it was real, the words hit him like a punch to the gut. He tried to stay steady. Under whose authority? Martial law hasn't been declared in the district. Baker's smile was thin, almost pitying. Special wartime powers, extended by executive order after the assassination of President Lincoln, he said. The paperwork's irrelevant. You're coming with us. Elias wanted to resist, to argue, but the guns were too close, the air was too heavy, and he knew, deep down, this had already been decided. False Skies, Part 1. The leak. It was supposed to be just another grey morning. Thomas Keene sat alone in a rundown motel on the edge of nowhere, a flickering fluorescent light above him and a cracked mirror across the room that reflected a man he barely recognized. The air stank of stale coffee and old cigarette smoke. A greasy plastic bag of takeout sat untouched on the nightstand. He didn't feel like a whistleblower, certainly not a hero. He just felt tired, worn down by guilt that had been eating away at him for years. The flash drive in his hand felt heavier than it should have, like it carried all the weight of what he was about to do. Its contents were damning. Encrypted FBI memos, shipping manifests, internal emails. Proof that the country's worst terror attack hadn't just been predicted, it had been allowed to happen, orchestrated, all to fuel wars, to line pockets, to secure power. He named the file Black Dust, an innocuous title, vague enough to slip through filters, but chillingly apt to those who'd understand. His laptop, a dented old Dell with duct tape over the camera, sat on a wobbly table. He checked the secure VPN one more time. The connection held. Outside, a semi rumbled past, trailing dust and fumes into the already bleak morning. His fingers trembled as he uploaded the file to an offshore whistleblower site, one known for publishing what others were too afraid to touch. He typed a short note, for the thousands who died, for the millions who were lied to. Then he hit send. For a moment, nothing happened. No explosion, no sirens. Just the low hum of the fridge in the corner. But within an hour, black dust was everywhere, on encrypted message boards, in the inboxes of freelance journalists, and, most notably, with a global news outlet known for taking risks. The outlet's editors pored over the data, cross-checking, verifying, whispering in hushed tones that bounced off glass walls and soundproof doors. By the end of the day, their site ran a cautiously worded headline: Breaking, leaked. Documents suggest prior knowledge of historic terror attack. The mainstream media barely blinked. At first, some called it a glitch. Others suspected a hoax, maybe an AI fabrication. But a few journalists couldn't shake the consistency. The details that aligned too well with known facts. The signatures that matched archived government files. Conspiracy. Theorists exploded with excitement. They hailed it as the smoking gun, the final puzzle piece, the proof they'd always known was out there. The government, on the other hand, denied everything. Officials used familiar words: unfounded, dangerous, potential threat to national security. Still, a quiet momentum began to grow. People read between the lines. They watched the way government spokespeople dodged questions, how major news anchors hesitated before switching topics, how suddenly Keene's name was trending, first on fringe forums, then everywhere. He became the most wanted man in America. Thomas wasn't prepared for fame or infamy. In the days that followed the leak, he moved constantly. Cheap motels, borrowed cars, burner phones. Every knock at the door made him flinch. Every stranger's glance felt like a potential threat. The paranoia was real, but also justified, because they were looking for him. Not just the FBI or Homeland Security, someone else. A group with no name, no official record. He could feel them in the silence behind phone clicks, in the static before, radio signals in the blank cars parked too long across the street. He began dreaming in fragments, flickers of old computer screens, lines of code, memos signed by people long thought dead, rooms filled with maps and pins and red yarn, a voice on the radio saying, "Control the fear, and you control everything." He remembered one document, in particular, It had chilled him more than the rest. A logistics memo, nothing flashy, outlining the movement of contingency assets days before the attack. Harmless on its own, but paired with time-stamped photos and corresponding phone calls, it told a story. A dark, coordinated one. He wondered how many others had seen it and said nothing. This is False Skies, a story buried beneath official reports and patriotic soundbites. A story about how fear, once weaponized, can be more profitable than peace. Story of a man who dared to expose the rot beneath the flag and paid the price. As you read on, you may find your breath catching. You may find yourself questioning what you once believed to be true. That's okay. Truth, after all, often wears a mask. And sometimes, the greatest conspiracies are hidden not in shadows, but in plain sight. A series of typed memos surfaced. Internal, intelligence briefings, stamped with high clearance classifications, dated months before the attack. The language was cold, clinical. In them, senior officials discussed the urgent need for a catalytic event. Something visceral enough to galvanize the public into supporting prolonged overseas military campaigns. Without significant emotional unity, one memo read, sustained, operations abroad may lose legitimacy. Alongside these chilling discussions were logs, seemingly mundane, but in context, deeply suspicious. Insurance policies on certain tower floors had been quietly expanded just days before the incident. Other entries detailed abrupt stand-down orders issued to military units engaged in scheduled war games. Orders that eerily aligned with the timeline of the real-world attack. Thomas Keane watched all of this unfold from a motel room that smelled like mildew and old smoke. The television glitched and buzzed, the screen flickering between a news anchor's strained smile and static. "This just in," the anchor said breathlessly. "The White House has officially denounced the leak as foreign disinformation. They insist the documents are fabricated." Keane let out a long, tired sigh. There it was. The first line of defense. Deny everything. The manhunt would follow. He closed his laptop gently, as if it might scream if handled too roughly, and slid it into a worn backpack. He grabbed his duffel, checked the blinds, and left the room without looking back. The cool air outside hit him like a slap. Time to disappear. For nearly a decade, Keane had worked quietly in the FBI's data analytics division. His job was never glamorous, just long hours parsing anomalies, cross-referencing communications, running regression patterns. But over time, certain things didn't add up. There were too many threads linking defense contractors, intelligence officials, and corporate financiers, people and entities that gained staggering profits in the wake of the attack. One by one, he'd saved files, clipped emails, flagged inconsistencies. Slowly, a dark mosaic came into focus. But it took years to find the courage to act. Today, he had. Elsewhere, the ripples began. The name Thomas Keane set off alarms in classified systems. Inside the intelligence community's uppermost tiers, his personnel file was flagged. His involvement in prior internal audits noted. The assumption came swiftly. He was the leak. Calls were made from a nameless branch buried beneath layers of bureaucratic fog. Their mission, locate and neutralize. At the top of this effort stood Eldridge Shaw, director of a clandestine agency whose name never appeared in budgets or oversight committees. Shaw had lived through the post-attack reshaping of the nation. He'd helped architect it. To him, the official story was not just truth, it was structural, untouchable. "This cannot spread," Shaw told his inner circle. "If the foundation crumbles, so does everything we built on it." By midnight, law enforcement bulletins labeled Thomas Keane a suspected hacker and a threat to national security. Digital forensics teams traced his last known login. Surveillance footage near the FBI's headquarters was reviewed frame by frame. They were looking for anything: his shoes, the pattern of his walk, the tilt of his head. Meanwhile, Shaw personally reached out to a media executive, an old contact. The instruction was simple: kill the story. "National interest," he said flatly. The response was swift. Major networks devoted only passing coverage to the leak. When it was mentioned at all, it was under banners like unverified claims spread online or anonymous data dump sparks controversy. But it was too late. The genie wasn't going back into the bottle. Online, the hashtag #SirBlackDust spread like wildfire. Independent analysts, amateur sleuths, and disillusioned tech workers began picking through the files. Some cross-referenced IP addresses embedded in the documents, many linked back to government subdomains. Forums exploded with speculation. Screen recordings of the memos spread across Telegram channels, Discord servers, encrypted threads, and for some, the implications landed like a hammer. If the files were authentic, they didn't just suggest negligence, they pointed to collusion, a betrayal, a deliberate act engineered for maximum casualties, maximum outrage, and maximum gain. A new phrase emerged, whispered first online, then on hand-painted protest signs: false skies. The idea was simple and devastating. What people believed to be reality was nothing but a carefully painted ceiling above them, hiding the real mechanics of control. By the next afternoon, protests broke out near federal buildings in New York, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles. They were small but angry. People held signs. Who knew? Show us the truth. No more lies. The government doubled down. Official statements repeated that the documents were part of a foreign disinformation campaign, possibly Russian or Iranian. That evening, rogue hacker collectives began issuing warnings. If the media didn't pick up the story, more files would be released, unfiltered, raw. The pressure was mounting. Markets responded like wounded animals. Military contractors saw their shares tumble. Whispers of insider trading from 20 years ago resurfaced. Keane listened to it all from a cabin deep in the woods, an old friend's place, long abandoned. The only connection to the outside world was a battery-powered radio that crackled with AM news and conspiracy chatter. He stared at the fireplace, its ashes long cold, and wondered how long he had before they found him, and what they would do to him when they did. He felt the inevitability of it in his bones. The tide was rising. He knew how easily the narrative could turn, how quickly a patriot could become a pariah. The next morning confirmed it. The FBI named him publicly. Thomas Keane, prime suspect in the unauthorized leak of classified materials. Possible extremist. Dangerous. He saw his face on a grainy image, flashed across local news. His old colleagues gave no official comment. Some were likely shocked. Others, he guessed, weren't surprised at all. Deep down, many of them knew what he knew. Some had probably seen the same patterns. Some might have even warned him, quietly, in passing. Now they were silent, but not everyone. In a cramped apartment. In another city, Sarah Voss, an investigative journalist once blacklisted for challenging the official 9/11 narrative, stared at her screen. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. The moment she read the leaked memos, something clicked. She'd seen fragments of these before, hinted at in anonymous emails, whispered over drinks by whistleblowers too afraid to go public. The language, the structure, it matched. Voss knew the stakes, but she also knew the patterns. She reached out to the whistleblower site hosting the files and left an encrypted message. "I can help verify. Let's talk. Let me speak to the source." That message had first appeared on an encrypted message board buried deep in the net, where truth seekers and whistleblowers shared paranoia like currency. It was short, typed by someone calling herself Voss, but it found its way to Thomas Keane, thanks to a trusted confidant in one of the few forums he still dared to monitor. Keane was holed up in a cluttered, dust-choked safe house outside Denver. It smelled faintly of mildew and old wiring. He hadn't opened the blinds in days. Sitting at a battered desk, surrounded by coffee-stained papers and a laptop patched together with tape, he typed a reply. Encrypted, cautious, but direct. "We talk soon. No names. No promises. Bring truth." The real game had begun. If he could get the documents to someone credible, someone the public might still trust, the lies might finally crack. The narrative the government had spent years cementing, one built on fear, on conflict, on death, might collapse. But the clock was ticking. Homeland Security and the nameless agencies operating beyond even their scope were already moving. He knew what would come next. Surveillance, threats, maybe worse. He'd seen it happen before. Still, if Voss was who she claimed, a respected investigative journalist with ties to independent outlets, she might just be the lifeline he needed. But it all depended on whether her hunger for truth was stronger than her fear, because exposing what Thomas had unearthed, the Black Dust Files, meant declaring war on the architects of war itself, and they would not go quietly. 2 days after the leak, the country boiled with confusion. Mainstream news outlets dismissed the documents as a sophisticated hoax, their anchors reading carefully scripted denials with eyes that barely masked discomfort. Government spokespeople stood behind polished podiums and reassured the nation that the files bore no resemblance to legitimate intelligence records. But smaller, scrappier sites weren't so quick to comply. They published the files side by side, with declassified FBI and CIA formats. The fonts, the metadata trails, even the formatting, all matched. Cyber experts whispered that the digital footprints were too consistent to fake. The public splintered. Some people clung to the official version, desperate for the comfort of certainty. Others questioned everything they thought they knew. If what the Black Dust Files revealed was true, if wars had been prolonged or even engineered for profit, if terror threats had been manufactured, then the last 20 years had been a lie. And Thomas Keane was already enemy number one. He had once worked as a data analyst at the FBI, mid-level, diligent, unnoticed, too quiet for politics, too observant for comfort. He'd flagged irregularities in pre-9/11 intelligence, raised questions that got buried, and eventually earned the quiet distrust of his superiors. When he left the Bureau 2 years ago, they hadn't suspected he'd been copying files scheduled for permanent deletion. Now they called him unstable, dangerous, a conspiracy theorist. The media repeated the script. What they didn't say was that his warnings had once almost triggered an internal investigation, until it got shut down at the top, buried, like the files he'd now risked everything to release. In a quiet suburban cul-de-sac outside the capital, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of a modest brick house. It was almost dusk. Birds chirped from the trees, oblivious. 4 men in plain suits stepped out. No badges, no words. Inside, a balding man in sweatpants opened the door, confused. He recognized one of them from an old office meeting years ago, back when he and Keane had worked in the same data unit. "What's this about?" the man asked. "Just need a quick look at your system," one of them said smoothly. Standard compliance check. They didn't wait for permission. They pushed inside, located his home computer, and began scanning it. Mentions of Keane, of black dust, of old shared directories, anything that might connect him to the leak, were copied, erased, or marked. There were no warrants, no paper trail. This happened in at least 4 other homes that week. Old co-workers, lunch buddies, shared project members. They weren't FBI. They answered to someone else. Far above them, in a tower with no name on the front and windows that reflected nothing, Director Eldridge Shaw watched the operation unfold. His office was cold, sterile, glass and polished wood, a wall of silent monitors. He was the head of a post-9/11 intelligence consolidation project. Most Americans didn't even know the agency existed. He remembered the morning of the attacks, the fear, the chaos, the opportunity. He'd built his career on it, pushing for more surveillance, tighter control, bigger contracts with defense corporations. The Patriot Act was his crucible. And now, 20 years of carefully crafted control was teetering because of one man, Reeve, Keane, whatever he calls himself, Shaw muttered to an aide. "We need him found, discredited, silenced. We cannot let fantasies unravel 2 decades of progress. Progress. That's what he called it. Meanwhile, Keane stayed on the move. He knew the checkpoints, knew where the highway cameras were positioned. He changed vehicles twice in 3 days, used fake IDs with just enough wear to pass a glance. He avoided cities, slept in the back of borrowed cars or anonymous motels on the edge of nowhere. His meals were energy bars and gas station snacks. He paid cash, no phones, no internet, just burner Wi-Fi and encrypted nodes. Every motel parking lot looked like it might host the black SUV. Each creak outside his door made his stomach twist. The paranoia wasn't irrational. It was survival. Then, finally, Voss reached out. Through a secure app. Her message pinged the corner of his screen. We need to meet. In person. I've verified enough to know you're not full of it. If you want the truth out, we need to move. The window is closing. He stared at the message for a long time. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, unmoving. Meeting in person meant risk. Surveillance, drones, microphones planted in lampposts. But without her, the files would stay fringe, dismissed as fake, buried under official denials. He typed slowly. 1. Meet, neutral place, bring nothing connected. We speak once, he hit send. Then powered down the laptop and stared into the stillness of the room. His reflection in the window looked pale, hunted. But behind the exhaustion, something else stirred. Resolve. It had taken him years to gather the truth. He wasn't going to die with it. They chose a quiet coastal town for their meeting, small enough to avoid suspicion, yet with enough transient traffic to disappear into. The rendezvous point was the local library, long closed for the evening, its old brick facade bathed in the amber glow of a dying sunset. Thomas Keane arrived just after 8:30 p.m. He parked 2 blocks away and approached the building on foot, cautious and slow. In the lot out front, a dark, unmarked sedan idled with its lights off. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Instantly, his gut twisted. Watchers. He kept walking past the library and circled the block, doubling back from a side street. Still, the car didn't move. No engine rev. No flash of movement inside. Maybe just someone waiting for a friend. Maybe not. Taking a deep breath, he walked through the side door Voss had left unlocked. The library was dim, the only light a flickering desk lamp in the corner of the reading room. The place smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Every sound echoed. Sarah Voss sat waiting between 2 dusty shelves in the back, near a window with its blinds half drawn. She stood when she saw him, tall, lean, wrapped in a worn leather jacket that looked like it had weathered dozens of assignments. Her eyes were sharp but tired. "Thomas," she said, her voice low but steady. "I believe you." Keane blinked, the words hitting harder than expected. So few had said that. He nodded, and they sat opposite each other at an old wooden table, half hidden behind stacks of forgotten history books. The official stories never held water, she added. But this could break it wide open. Let's finalize the proof. Keane reached into his coat and slid a small USB drive across the table. His hand trembled slightly. This is the full archive. Way more than what I posted. Internal memos, direct communications about troop stand-down orders, off-the-books contractor payments, flight path diversions, even emails describing the hijackers as uncontrolled assets. It's all here. He paused, swallowing hard, his voice catching. They used the attack, twisted it into an excuse for endless war. And worse, I think they knew, or made sure it happened. Sarah exhaled slowly, the weight of it all sinking in. She plugged the USB into her laptop, its screen casting blue light onto their faces. As she scanned the files, her eyes widened. "Holy hell," she whispered. "Bank transactions, offshore routing numbers, and what's this? Operation Silence. Keane nodded grimly. It was a contingency plan. If word ever got out. She shut the laptop gently, thinking, this is explosive, but if I just dump it on my blog, they'll snuff it out, discredit it, maybe even block it completely. She looked up at him. We need a platform big enough to force them to acknowledge it. A mainstream journalist with some guts. Or a live event. One loud enough that they can't black it out in time. Before Keane could respond, a faint noise echoed through the building. The muffled sound of something heavy shifting near the entrance. They froze. A figure loomed beyond the frosted glass of the front door. Tall, dark-clothed, unmoving. Keane's breath caught in his throat. He moved instinctively, grabbing the laptop, while Sarah slid behind a nearby bookshelf. The figure stepped, closer, peering in. Then the door creaked open. An old man shuffled in, humming to himself. Evening, the library's caretaker said, setting down a set of keys. Didn't know anyone was still around. Sarah smiled tightly from behind the shelf. Just finishing some research. The man nodded and wandered off. Keane peered out the window. The dark figure was gone. Could have been nothing, Sarah said quietly. Or it could have been someone confirming we're here. They packed up quickly, agreeing to reconvene in 48 hours near a local news station, one that still had a few unfiltered voices on staff. The plan was bold. Infiltrate the studio, hijack the broadcast, and release the documents live on air. If they could time it right, the momentum might snowball before the government could suppress it. That night, back at his temporary hideout, Keane received a message from an old friend, one of the few who had helped him decode ancient FAA logs and correlate flight path anomalies. One of our guys is dead. Boat accident. This is real. They're cleaning house. Be careful. The message cut off abruptly. No follow-up. No sign of the sender. Keane sat in silence, phone clenched in his hand. The line had been crossed. The watchers weren't just tracking, they were eliminating. One by one, they were removing anyone who could verify the leak's authenticity. Time was slipping away. Meanwhile, protests flared across the country. Some groups claimed the revelations were dishonoring the dead. Others marched in fury, demanding truth and accountability. Chants filled the streets, mixing with sirens and the pop of flashbangs. In Washington, Director Shaw appeared on screen, calm and stone-faced. Domestic agitators spreading fabricated conspiracies, he said, are no less dangerous than foreign threats. We will bring them to justice. Voss dug deeper into the files, driven by obsession and fear. In one folder, she discovered a buried reference. The Saturn Files, an internal ledger tracking post-attack financial flows, connecting government budgets to private, clandestine recipients. The money trail. If they could find the full Saturn archive, they could expose not just the lies, but the profiteers, names, companies, dates, everything. But the clock was burning down. Helicopters began sweeping low over highways at night. Random traffic stops multiplied. Police started using mobile biometric scanners on city streets. Keane dyed his hair, wore coloured contacts, changed his gait. He moved from one motel to another, sleeping in half-hour bursts. He knew every exit, every fire escape. He also knew it couldn't last. Eventually, he'd have to stop running. Eventually, they'd catch up, or he'd have to confront them first. If public outrage grew fast enough, loud enough, it might shield him. But if he stumbled, if the final proof didn't reach the world in time, the whole story would vanish like smoke. And far away, in a black site bunker, a special ops team was being briefed. Their orders were precise. Their funding came from accounts Sarah had just begun to uncover. Their goal was simple: erase Thomas Keane. Erase the leak. Erase the truth before it could shatter the world it threatened to expose. The next few steps could change everything. For an entire week, Thomas Keane lived like a fugitive, dodging shadowy figures he called the Watchers by day, and poring over encrypted documents with Sarah Voss by night. Each evening they met in different safe spots, cheap motels, dusty storage units, and once, even the back room of a laundromat that never closed. The urgency in their voices grew with each meeting. One night, lit only by the dim glow of a desk lamp in a remote safe house, borrowed from one of Sarah's old contacts, they stumbled onto something big. Scattered through fragmented CIA memos were vague but recurring references to something called the Saturn files. They're encrypted, Sarah said, rubbing her eyes. But from the metadata and code fragments, this isn't just surveillance. Junk. It looks like a ledger. Thomas leaned in. Of what? Of everything. Money trails, where it flowed right after the attack. To who? From who? Defense contractors, oil corporations, political campaigns, all within 2 weeks of the event. He swallowed hard. If this is real, it doesn't just prove a cover-up, it shows motive. Sarah nodded. War for profit. And there it was, the phrase that had haunted them both for months. False flag, engineered tragedy, the kind of thing that would get you disappeared just for whispering. Among the data fragments was a location. A defunct NSA facility tucked into the edge of a southwestern desert. It had supposedly been decommissioned over a decade ago, but rumors said it still held offline backup servers. Sarah pointed to a string of coordinates. If we find the raw archive, we can extract the Saturn files directly, not secondhand leaks. The real deal. That's the smoking gun. Thomas gave a quiet nod, though his stomach twisted. Infiltrating a federal facility, abandoned or not, was suicide. Between the two of them, they had one battered sedan, a few $1,000 in untraceable cash, and a couple of hacked-together laptops. The Watchers had everything else: drones, tactical teams, face recognition software, full access to surveillance grids. But maybe that was their edge. The Watchers wouldn't expect them to go after an old ghost site. Maybe, just maybe, the element of surprise would work in their favor. Back in DC, Director Eldridge Shaw tightened the net. Every official channel echoed the same story. A rogue former FBI analyst is leaking forged foreign intelligence to destabilize the country. The headlines screamed treason. Anchors with solemn voices asked, how much damage could one man do? And yet, the public wasn't buying it like before. Not entirely. Whispers began to spread. Social feeds swelled with blackout profile pictures. People started asking hard questions. If it's fake, why are so many people dying to stop it? Data archivist in Baltimore was found shot execution style in his living room. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. They didn't mention the man's background or his connection to the leaked materials. Another whistleblower died in a suspicious fire. The stories stacked up. Soon, protests erupted. Handmade signs waved in city squares. We deserve the truth, and stop killing our whistleblowers. The government responded with riot gear and mass arrests. Peaceful demonstrators were labeled domestic threats. It was a slow descent into martial law. Thomas tried not to let it shake him. He focused on the prize. If these files show what I think they do, he told Sarah one night while staring into the dark ceiling of another motel room. We're talking direct transfers, corporate giants funneling money into politicians' pockets. Then, days later, those same politicians pass bills pouring billions into defense budgets, all after the false flag. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. That would bring down the entire post-attack narrative. No wonder they're hunting us so hard. They bought fake IDs, messy, slightly off, but better than nothing. Then they drove cross-country using only back roads, no highways, no tolls, no cities. They paid cash, avoided gas stations with cameras, and slept in roadside inns for single nights. Always one step ahead, but never far enough to feel safe. The tension between them crackled. Sleep was rare. Conversations clipped. Every glance in the rearview mirror made their hearts race. Then, on a stretch of cracked two-lane road bordered by empty farmland, it happened. A black SUV appeared in the distance, growing rapidly in the rear view. Thomas gripped the wheel. Same pattern, Sarah whispered. They're tailing us. Without a word, he swerved onto a dirt path, cutting through rows of corn. The stalks towered on both sides, rustling like whispers. The SUV followed, headlights bouncing wildly. Then, bang! A tire exploded. The car jerked and spun, crashing sideways into a shallow ditch. Smoke hissed. Sarah yanked open her door. Out! Now! They stumbled into the tall corn, crawling low, between the rows. The SUV doors slammed behind them. Flashlights cut across the stalks. Thomas held his breath, heart pounding like a war drum. They crouched in silence, barely daring to breathe. After what felt like hours, but was likely minutes, the agents gave up. The corn was too dense. A gunfight here would draw attention. The key, SUV backed out, then silence. They didn't speak for a long time. Sarah finally broke it. Her voice trembled. They wouldn't be this desperate unless we were close. Thomas just nodded, wiping sweat from his brow with a shaking hand. After more days of detours, worn maps, and quiet paranoia, they reached their destination, a lonely stretch of sun-scorched desert. At its edge stood the ruins of an old government compound. Weeds broke through the cracked asphalt. The chain-link fence sagged. Sun-bleached warning signs flapped in the hot wind. It really is abandoned, Thomas said. Perfect place to hide ghosts, Sarah replied. They circled until they found a corner of the fence previously cut open, probably by looters long ago. The edges rusted and curled. They slipped inside silently. The main building loomed ahead in the fading light. Its silhouette jagged against the orange horizon. Windows boarded, roof sagging. No power, no movement. And yet, deep inside, it might hold the single truth that could unravel everything. A lone coyote howled somewhere out in the desert, the sound long and mournful. The wind followed, slipping through rusted vents above them, carrying with it a faint metallic whistle, like the breath of something long dead, but not quite gone. Inside the facility, everything was frozen in time. Dust coated the floors in thick layers, and ancient office chairs lay toppled around old cubicles. The place smelled of rust, stale air, and decay. Thomas and Sarah moved slowly, flashlights cutting thin beams through the gloom. "This place feels wrong," Thomas muttered, stepping over a collapsed ceiling tile. Eventually, after weaving through a series of narrow hallways and gutted offices, they found what they were looking for, a sub-basement littered with battered computer racks. Most were dark and cold, but a few lights blinked dimly. "There's still power," Thomas said, frowning. "That's not a good sign." Sarah's expression darkened. Could mean the watchers are still connected, still pulling data. In the far corner of the room stood a thick steel door, marked in faded paint, Server Vault Archive 6. A biometric scanner blinked red beside it. Sarah pulled out her phone and loaded an old, half-corrupted code they'd recovered earlier. She started generating a bypass sequence using fragments of the original security protocol. "Come on," she whispered, trying different combinations. After several attempts, the scanner finally chirped. A green light flashed. The door hissed, then creaked open with a slow, metallic groan. Inside, rows of aging drives and reel-to-reel machines lined steel shelves. The air was stale, but faintly cooled. Climate control was barely hanging on, but still running. Thomas's flashlight skimmed over dust-covered labels, Operation Cast Peak Post-K War Roster, and finally, Saturn. "There," Sarah breathed. The Saturn rack was older, its casing dented and scorched in places, but it still hummed softly. They carefully powered one of the terminals and connected it to a laptop. Sarah typed a root-level command into the terminal. The monitor buzzed to life with a login prompt. Restricted. Saturn 123. Enter pass. She entered potential passwords from the documents they'd reviewed. On the third try, the screen flickered and let them in. Thomas leaned in as the directory loaded. Dozens of file trees spilled across the screen. Massive funding authorizations, building demolition records, Encrypted communications between high-level officials. Some were flagged internal use only. Others were worse. Plausible deniability assets. Post-event war schedule. Controlled ignition subjects. My God, Sarah whispered. It's all here. The files traced money, billions, flowing, from corporate giants to politicians in the days immediately following the attack. Banks had coordinated mass asset shifts. Insider trades were time-stamped just before the market crashes. Even certain journalists were implicated in spreading the panic narrative in exchange for future favors. They planned it, Thomas said, hollowly. Every bit of it. The fear, the legislation, the wars. They used the hijackers like puppets, Sarah added. Knew they were coming and let them through. Used them as an excuse. Neither of them noticed the shift in the air. Soft, almost imperceptible. Then came the sound of boots upstairs. Thomas froze. They're here, Sarah said, eyes wide. They tracked the power draw. We don't have time, Thomas said, launching a data transfer across multiple encrypted drives. We need to copy everything. Sarah shut off the lights, sinking behind a row of servers. She reached into her coat and pulled out a compact pistol. The vault door slammed open. Flashlights cut through the dark like searchlights. Then, gunfire. Bullets struck the racks with metallic pings, sparks flying. Sarah fired back, ducking behind a console. Thomas kept working, fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled out a small satellite uplink router and connected the laptop. We're going live, he shouted. Are you crazy? Sarah yelled over the gunfire. They can destroy the drives, but not the cloud. The upload began. Transmission, 10%. Suddenly, from the stairwell, a familiar voice echoed down the corridor. Stop! Director Eldridge Shaw stepped into view, flanked by 2 armed watchers. His face was a mask of fury. Thomas, he said, voice booming, you have no idea what you're doing. That data, those events, they're too complex to release raw. You'll ignite global instability. Gunfire resumed. Sarah cried out as a bullet grazed her shoulder. She bit back a scream and returned fire, keeping the agents pinned behind the doorframe. Upload. 50%. Throw it, Shaw barked. A small device arced through the air. Flashbang. The explosion hit like a thunderclap. Thomas's ears rang. He stumbled. Sarah hit the floor, eyes blinking in disoriented confusion. The watchers surged forward. One tackled Sarah, pinning her. Another stomped on the laptop. The screen cracked. Upload. 80%. Frozen. Thomas growled, wrenching free from a guard and slamming the damaged laptop into the man's face. The impact sparked something. The laptop flickered, revived. The upload resumed. Another watcher dove for the cable. A stray bullet struck a nearby coolant pipe. Steam burst out, scalding hot and loud. The room filled with blinding mist. The infiltration team hesitated. This place is gonna blow, one of them shouted. Director Shaw advanced toward Thomas. His gun was drawn. Steady. You can die here with your delusions, he said coldly, or you can disappear. Either way, this truth dies with you. Upload. 98%. Thomas gritted his teeth, blood running down his temple. He reached forward, fingers trembling, and slammed a final keystroke. Beep. Transmission complete. The signal shot out, unstoppable now. One watcher screamed in rage and fired. The bullet struck Thomas in the chest. He crumpled, gasping. The others scrambled to yank cables, destroy drives. But it was too late. The Saturn files had already reached their destination. Safe, encrypted, and likely mirrored across a dozen. Hidden servers. Alarms blared. The overheated systems sparked. The busted coolant line triggered a surge in the ancient power grid. Something overloaded. Explosion. Fire raced through the walls. Panels collapsed. The vault roared with noise and chaos. Sarah, bleeding and stunned, tried to crawl out. Another explosion knocked her back, the concussive force tossing her across the room like a rag doll. Smoke filled her lungs. Flames chased the shadows. Behind her, the Saturn servers began to melt. The watchers stumbled back from the edge of the shore, eyes wide with shock, smoke curling around their torn uniforms. Behind them, the hidden submarine base detonated in a deafening roar. Fire shot skyward, turning night into a brief, violent day. The ground quaked beneath their boots as the massive structure collapsed in on itself, sending a rolling wave of dust into the air. No one said it out loud, but the thought was shared. Keane was gone, buried under tons of concrete and steel. Maybe. He never made it out, but none of that mattered anymore, because he'd done it. The Saturn files had been uploaded. Within hours, the internet caught fire. The files weren't just leaked, they flooded the digital world. Encrypted archives, raw documents, full audio logs, video files. They were everywhere. Mirrors popped up faster than authorities could take them down. Whistleblower collectives, underground media, even average people who'd grabbed a copy were spreading it. Reddit threads exploded. Twitter trended globally. Telegram groups swelled with hundreds of thousands of new members. Government agencies scrambled in a frenzy. Cybersecurity divisions tried blocking the files. Officials held emergency press briefings, calling the leak a sophisticated hoax, foreign interference. But the more they tried to deny it, the more people paid attention. Censorship was gasoline on the fire, and the files, they were horrifying. Top secret memos labeled Operation White Dome. Others stamped Project Switchboard. These weren't just reports, they were instructions, cold, deliberate plans, emails between senior intelligence officials and shadowy groups, handwritten notes in scanned pages with names, dates, and approval stamps. One memo broke it down bluntly. Mass trauma, exploited for permanent wartime policies. Another detailed partnerships with fringe militant groups. Not to stop them, but to use them, to generate fear, to justify expanding control. There was even a chart outlining which media outlets could be trusted to play along and which needed to be influenced. One document included a calculation of projected civilian casualties deemed strategically acceptable. It read like a spreadsheet for murder. The world reeled. Allied governments demanded answers from Washington. Nations that once stood with the US were now furious, blindsided. The UN convened an emergency session within 48 hours. The public reaction was swift and furious. In major cities, people poured into the streets. Candlelight vigils turned into marches. Protesters held signs, with Keane's face printed across them, scrawled with words like truth and justice. Chants of "no more lies" echoed through downtowns, across every time zone. The White House tried to stay ahead of the chaos. Spokespeople claimed the documents were forgeries, expertly doctored. But then came the digital sleuths. Independent. Cybersecurity analysts began dissecting the files. Data scientists verified encryption keys, timestamps, user logs. Everything checked out. The structure of the files matched software used by US intelligence 20 years ago. Even skeptics were forced to admit the metadata was consistent with authentic government systems. Then, the moment that cracked the dam open, former intelligence officers started to speak. One after another, mid-level agents appeared on live streams and podcasts, some wearing disguises, others showing their faces. "I was there when they drafted the first outline of White Dome," one said, eyes hollow. "We were told it was about containment. We didn't know what we were helping build." Their voices shook. Some cried. Others couldn't even finish their sentences. But the damage was done. The truth had faces now. In the US, the effect was immediate. Thousands gathered outside the Capitol, DHS headquarters, and military contractor offices. Protesters surrounded Raytheon's building chanting, "Profits over lives." Defense sector stocks crashed. Major CEOs resigned overnight. Some vanished, boarding private jets, never to be seen again. Lawsuits followed. Human rights groups filed class actions. Whistleblower protections were invoked. International courts began to examine potential war crimes. Retired generals showed up on cable news, trying to distance themselves. "I had no idea it went that deep," one claimed. Another gave a vague apology before cutting the interview short. Media. Outlets were split. Some networks finally admitted they'd helped shape the post-9/11 narrative under pressure. Anchors issued public apologies. One trembled as she said on air, "We failed you." Others dug in deeper, clinging to patriotism, spinning new theories. But that only fueled distrust. Audiences walked away in droves. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Misinformation collided with cold facts. But there was too much truth now, too much evidence to bury. "You can't close the barn door after the horses have fled," a political analyst muttered during a live panel. The host said nothing, just nodded. And then came the question, the one that echoed in kitchens, classrooms, and cafes across America. If the post-9/11 world was built on this, what else had been a lie? Desperate to regain control, Director Eldridge Shaw, head of the National Intelligence Directorate, held a live press conference. Cameras flashed. Protesters screamed outside. He barely made it 2 sentences before the crowd's boos drowned him out. His office declared a national security emergency. Martial law was on the table. The backlash was immediate. Governors from several states went online within hours. "We will not enforce federal orders without transparency," one declared. "We stand with the people, not the cover-up. Power." Fractures appeared everywhere. Political alliances shifted. Investigations launched. Subpoenas flooded the system. Young lawmakers rose to the spotlight, fired up and fearless. New committees were formed. Prosecutors dug into old archives. That's when Sarah Voss reappeared, the only one who made it out of the Saturn facility alive. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Pale, eyes rimmed red, but her voice was steady. On a live stream watched by millions, she recounted what happened that night. "They overran us, the watchers. They knew we were inside." Her voice cracked. "Keane told me to run. He stayed. He had to finish the upload." Later that day, she released a written piece. One man's last key press. It went viral in minutes. She described the chaos, the blood, the panic. She wrote about hearing Keane's voice over the comms, about how, with one arm shattered, he dragged himself to the terminal. "I heard him gasp," she wrote. "He said, 'It's done.' And then there was silence." People couldn't stop reading it. He was no longer just a name. He was a hero. A man who died, so the truth wouldn't. Across the country, families of 9/11 victims called for retrials. Evidence that had once been sealed was now fair game. Lawyers worked around the clock. Even original investigators began confessing how they were misled, how they were threatened, how entire files were hidden from them. America mourned all over again, but this time the grief was heavier. It wasn't just about loss, it was about betrayal. Some people wept, others just stared at their screens in silence, and many couldn't sleep, their thoughts spiraling into dark places. The question on everyone's lips, the one no politician could seem to answer, was simple. How did fear become so profitable, and how did good people let it happen? Across the globe, countries that had once stood together in the war on terror felt betrayed. Some pulled their troops out of contested zones, refusing to support what they now saw as a lie. Others opened parliamentary inquiries, suspecting their own governments had known more than they let on. The international order, carefully built after the attack, began to fall apart. What replaced it was unclear, chaotic, fragile, and deeply uncertain. Some dared to believe this collapse might lead to a more peaceful, less militarized world, but others were uneasy, warning that the confusion and distrust could open the door for new extremist groups to rise from the rubble. And in the middle of it all, one rumor refused to die. Thomas Keane might still be alive. A few said they saw him in remote villages, far from any city. Grainy photos popped up online, always inconclusive. The official stance was clear, presumed dead. But if he had survived, it made sense. He would have shed his identity like a snake sheds its skin, leaving behind Thomas Keane, the whistleblower, and becoming someone else, someone unknown, a ghost in plain sight. 6 months later, the Senate launched one of the largest hearings in US history. It was broadcast live. Millions watched. Former generals, ex-CEOs, national security advisors, and White House staffers, people who had shaped the world 2 decades ago, were called to testify. The room was electric, humming with tension. Some clung to the Fifth Amendment. Others hid behind the shield of national security. A few broke. They admitted small roles, hinted at larger ones, sometimes with shaking hands or red-rimmed eyes. There were indictments. Not all led to convictions. The machinery of the system was too vast, too protected, but the symbolism mattered. A crack had formed. The public had tasted the truth, and they wouldn't swallow official stories so easily again. Meanwhile, Sarah Voss, once a blacklisted journalist, launched her own media platform. It was raw, unfiltered, and unstoppable. She broadcast daily updates on the False Skies inquiry. People from all walks of life sent in files, messages, testimonies. Some offered cryptic stories, others brought receipts. She became a household name, not as a pundit, but as a crusader, relentless, fierce, and finally free. A year after the Assassination leak, a new memorial was built just a few blocks from Ground Zero. At the center stood a statue, a lone figure, hunched over a keyboard, finger pressed to one key. It was subtle, not grand, quiet, human. Below it, an inscription. They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back in the light. People left flowers, letters, candles, not just in memory, but in relief. Finally, someone had pulled the curtain back. Finally, someone had dared to speak. Epilogue. In a sleepy coastal town with salty air and chipped boats, a local fisherman told a strange story to anyone who'd listen. He'd seen a man standing by the dock at sunrise. His face looked familiar, older than the photos, but something in the eyes. He was weathered, skin tanned and tough, hair faded almost white from sun and salt. Quiet, kind of sad. They spoke briefly. The man said he'd used to work for the government. Not anymore, he added. I learned too much. He talked about illusions, about how seeing behind the curtain can change you, make it impossible to go back. Then he handed the fisherman a worn flash drive, nodded once, and disappeared into the fog. If that man was Thomas Keane, he had chosen to let the world carry the weight of his truth. He had become part of the story, then stepped out of it. Public. Trust never fully recovered. Some people were angry, betrayed. Others clung to the hope that a new era of honesty might begin. In dusty corners of the internet, forums buzzed with speculation. Were the architects of the deception really gone, or simply hiding, waiting for their moment? But for now at least, the great lie had been broken open. The term black dust, once a classified label, became a symbol, a warning, a reminder that truth, once released, cannot be caged. And in the stillness that followed, one thought echoed across the world. They used fear to shape the world, but one day, fear lost. Behind him, Maya Torres gave a quiet sigh and rolled her eyes, but she didn't interrupt. She'd heard Jason give versions of this monologue more times than she could count. MK Ultra, the Montauk Project, time travel, conspiracies, fake moon landings. He'd chased all of it with wild energy, but this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just talk. Cut the recording, Jason said abruptly, spinning his chair around to face her. His expression was electric. Did you get the email? Maya nodded, brushing a loose strand of black hair behind her ear. Desert Valley Logistics, she said. You're in. Jason grinned like a kid who just snuck into an R-rated movie. Background check cleared. Somehow. Not somehow. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. 6 months of fake references, A spotless digital footprint. A whole identity. Built from scratch. I planned this down to the DNS logs. Maya raised an eyebrow. You're going in as a food delivery guy to a military base. Not exactly hacking the Pentagon. Jason shrugged. It's a start. I get through that front gate. I get inside the perimeter. That's all I need. She gave him a long look. Part admiration, part concern. You really think the XFiles were just the beginning? Jason nodded, slowly this time. His tone changed, lower, more serious. I think that was one piece of something bigger. And whatever's buried under Desert Valley, it's not just old records. He stood up, stretching his back, then reached for his phone. Maya glanced at the screen. The GPS signal was already bouncing. A new route, a remote location. Jason, just be careful, okay? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Truth has a cost, Maya. Always has. But if we don't dig for it, who will? She didn't answer. Just watched him pack up the gear and slip the flash drive into his jacket pocket. Outside, the wind picked up. A dry, restless breeze. Something was coming. And that's more than anyone else has pulled off. The plan had been in the works for over a year. Jason had spent months tracking every movement of Desert Valley Logistics, a civilian contractor that handled food services for multiple military installations across Nevada. One of those locations, the Nevada Test and Training Range, including Area 51. Maya sat on the couch, scrolling through encrypted files on her tablet. The screen lit up her face in the darkened room. Let's walk through it again, she said, tapping through a series of diagrams and notes. You start the job Monday. First month, you stick to routine deliveries, play it safe, be invisible, build trust. Jason nodded. Then I start recording, mapping routes, noting security patterns, checkpoint timing. All while wearing those glasses, Maya added, glancing up, which, by the way, cost us nearly our entire gear budget. Worth it, Jason replied, without hesitation. Microscopic cameras. They're undetectable during standard security sweeps. All footage transmits to your setup in the van, via the modified watch. She shook her head slightly, amazed and nervous at the same time. The plan was tight. Jason would work the job like any other employee, no red flags. Maya would operate from a custom-built mobile command center, an old van she gutted and rebuilt from the inside out. Signal boosters, encrypted uplinks, a multi-layer VPN system to keep their exact location masked. Months of prep, tests, dry runs. Eventually, on a scheduled delivery run, Jason would deviate, just enough to slip past authorized zones and into the restricted core. That's where the real footage would come from. You realize this isn't just trespassing, right? Maya said. Her voice was low but heavy. This is federal land, highly classified. You get caught in the wrong hallway and we're talking serious time. Prison. Jason's expression shifted. The usual fire in his eyes dimmed to something deeper. Do you know why I'm doing this? Maya glanced at him, waiting. You think? It's for the channel, he said. For the views, the subscribers, isn't it? He turned toward the corkboard on the wall. Layers of newspaper clippings, forum printouts, grainy photos, all webbed together with red string and thumbtacks. My dad worked at Groom Lake for 12 years, he said softly. He came home, one day with headaches, wouldn't go away. 2 months later, stage 4 brain cancer. No history of it in our family. Maya's face softened. Jason. Right before he died, Jason continued, voice shaking slightly. He tried to tell my mom something about non-terrestrial intelligence, about things in the sky. She thought he was hallucinating. He was on so many meds by then. But I don't think he was. I believe him. There was a pause. Maya didn't try to argue. She knew when he was set on something. I just need proof, he whispered. Maya sighed and refocused on her tablet. The stream goes to a secure relay first. Then it auto-distributes to 17 different platforms if something happens. You go dark for more than 90 minutes, it kicks in. Dead man switch. Jason nodded. Perfect. Not the word I'd use, she muttered under her breath. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur. Jason slid seamlessly into his new role at Desert Valley Logistics. Woke up early, clocked in, delivered meals, smiled politely. He studied routines, memorized gate codes, noted which guards rotated and when. He made himself blend in. No mistakes. No drama. Maya, meanwhile, transformed the van into a fortress on wheels. A satellite dish was mounted to the roof. Inside, battery banks hummed. Backup generators, signal scramblers, dual 5G routers. Everything redundant, everything secure. They tested the glasses in the desert at night. Jason walked routes while Maya monitored footage on her screens. The video was clean, stable, no lag, no dropouts. Jason's followers started to notice the change. He posted less, but teased just enough. "I'm on the verge of something big," one video hinted. Another, "Some secrets can't stay buried forever." He didn't dwell on the numbers, but his subscriber count quietly crossed the 1 million mark. 2 days before infiltration day, Maya found Jason staring at an old photo. His father, smiling, standing near a military jeep. The edges of the photo were curling from age. "We can still back out," she said quietly. Jason shook his head. "Too far in. And if it turns out to be just a regular base, fine, I'll say that. But I don't believe that's all it is." He turned to her. "Remember that truck driver from last month? The one who posted about seeing weird aircraft and, what did he call them? Non-standard personnel." Maya nodded. The post had appeared on a fringe forum, described tall figures, pale skin, odd movements. The kind of story you scroll past. It was deleted within hours. The account was gone by morning. "Could have been a troll," she said. "Could have been a warning," Jason replied. "I don't know what's out there, Maya, but I have to find out." The night before the op, they didn't sleep. Jason lay on the floor with his hands behind his head, staring up at the ceiling. The van parked a few miles from the base, dark and quiet. Maya checked and rechecked every cable, every signal, every line of code in her backup systems. Her heart thudded in her chest. She hated the risk, but she understood why he had to do it. Outside, the desert wind picked up, whispering against the side of the van. Jason ran through the plan one last time, mentally ticking off every step while Mia double-checked, then triple-checked her gear. She crouched in the back of the van, surrounded by equipment, her fingers moving with mechanical precision. "Camera feeds are clean," she said, glancing at her laptop. "Audio's solid. Encrypted channel is open and stable." Jason gave a slow nod, unusually quiet. "You okay?" Mia asked, studying his face. He hesitated. "Yeah, just thinking this might be the most important thing we ever do." Mia reached out, squeezed his hand, her grip warm and grounding. "Then we stick to the plan. Get in. Document what we can. Get out. No improvising. No hero stuff." Jason smirked faintly. "Yes, Mom. They didn't say the other thing. The thing both of them had been avoiding all morning. That by this time tomorrow, they might be heroes, or they might vanish without a trace." The Nevada desert stretched out in all directions, like a sun-bleached graveyard, silent under the rising heat. Jason kept his eyes on the road as the delivery truck hummed along the empty highway. The air, conditioning wheezed from the dashboard vents, barely keeping the sweat from building on his palms. "In 2 miles you'll hit checkpoint 1, Mia's voice crackled in his nearly invisible earpiece. "Copy," Jason said quietly. He tugged at the collar of his uniform. Desert Valley Logistics, plain and boring. A perfect cover. But today it felt like a costume. Checkpoint 1 came into view. A squat booth manned by a single guard surrounded by a chain-link fence and desert dust. Jason slowed the truck and pulled up beside the small outpost. "Morning, Reeve," said the guard, Peterson, middle-aged, buzz-cut, friendly in a bored kind of way. "You're early." "Traffic was light," Jason replied, keeping his tone casual. He handed over his ID, the shipping manifest, and the delivery clearance. His glasses, outfitted with a micro camera, recorded everything. The data streamed back to Mia, who was parked 3 miles behind in a surveillance van, disguised as a service vehicle. Peterson gave the paperwork a glance, ran it through a handheld scanner, then handed it back. All clear. Stick to the route. Jason nodded, heart pounding behind a cool exterior. He eased the truck forward as the gate lifted with a hydraulic groan. The truck rolled through the outer perimeter of the Nevada test and training range, kicking up a trail of dust that hung in the air like smoke. "First checkpoint clear," Jason whispered. "Got it," Mia replied. "Feed's perfect. 35 people watching the stream already. I'll keep it private until you're out. Safe." Jason's knuckles tightened on the wheel. He knew the road ahead by heart. Long stretches of nothing, flanked by desert brush and distant surveillance towers. Over the past few months, he'd studied them all. Where the cameras pointed, their blind spots, how long they panned each angle. "Second checkpoint in sight," he murmured. "Nearly 15. Minutes later, this one was different. Serious, high fences, armed military, not contract guards. As he pulled up, 2 soldiers approached the truck. Stern faces, mirrored sunglasses. One took the clipboard from Jason's hand. The other carried a long-handled mirror and began inspecting the underside of the vehicle. "Step out of the truck, please," the first soldier said. Jason obeyed, every movement calculated to look routine. He stepped onto the hot asphalt, his face calm, though inside his stomach was knotted. The sunglasses on his face weren't just for show. They were transmitting a live feed to Mia. His watch, modified to hide its transmitter, vibrated gently against his wrist. "Routine inspection," the soldier added, though his tone lacked any warmth. "Arms out." Jason complied as a handheld scanner was swept over his body. The device gave a soft beep as it passed over his wrist. "Standard issue tracker," Jason said before the soldier could ask. "Company policy. All drivers. Wear them. Safety thing." The soldier stared at the watch for a moment, then gave a curt nod and moved on. The scanner didn't pick up the embedded tech Jason had carefully shielded. "You're delivering to the mess hall?" the guard asked, flipping through the paperwork. "Yes, sir. Weekly supplies, canned goods, dry rations. Pretty dull stuff." The guard narrowed his eyes slightly, studying Jason's face. "You've been coming here a while now." "About 3 months," Jason replied, voice steady. "It's a good route. No traffic, nice scenery." There was a long pause. Jason could hear the wind over the flat desert. Then the guard handed back his documents. "Proceed to delivery point, Charlie. Do not deviate from your route. Any unscheduled stops, detours, or delays will result in immediate detention. Understood?" Jason gave a crisp nod. Understood. Climbing back into the truck, he felt the heat cling to his skin, sweat pooling under his arms. The gate in front of him began to open with a low grind. As he passed through it, something shifted in the air, a subtle tension, like stepping into a room where everyone had just gone silent. He was in. Jason passed through the second gate and exhaled quietly, hands still gripping the wheel too tightly. "I'm in," he murmured into his mic. "Second checkpoint cleared." Viewer counts climbing. "Fast," Mia said, her voice steady but alert. "Private streams blowing up. Nearly 200 people watching now. They're sharing the link, even though I told them not to." The narrow road sloped into a sun-baked valley, and as Jason rounded the curve, the base finally came into full view. He instinctively eased off the gas, breath-catching. He'd seen satellite images, blurry recon shots, schematics, but none of that compared to seeing it for real. A sprawling complex lay before him. Dozens of hangars stretched across the compound like metal shells. Clusters of low concrete buildings sat in neat grids. Some structures had no windows, no labels, just matte grey surfaces and barbed wire fences. Thin black poles, likely motion. Sensors or high-speed cameras jutted out at intervals along the perimeter. "This is it, Mia," Jason said under his breath. No turning back now. The delivery route curved around the east side of the complex and led him toward a squat, cinder block building marked with faded stencils. Mess Services Unit 14. He backed the truck up to the loading dock like he'd done so many times before, trying to ignore the way his hands trembled on the gear shift. Routine delivery, he called out as two workers emerged from the shade of the loading bay. I've got 26 crates for you today. One of the workers, Gaza, a broad-shouldered man with a tired face and a Desert Valley Logistics cap, nodded. Jason had spoken to him a few times on previous runs. We'll take it from here, Gaza grunted, already moving toward the back of the truck. Here it was, the moment. Jason kept his posture casual, grabbed a clipboard and said, Actually, I'm supposed to verify the cold storage items myself this time. New policy, after that mess with the spoiled chicken last month. Gaza groaned under his breath, clearly annoyed, but didn't argue. Fine, come on then. Jason followed him through a set of heavy double doors. His heart hammered in his chest, but outwardly he looked relaxed. Just another bored delivery guy doing his job. Each hallway turn was carefully logged in his head. Every corner, every camera. Feed still good, he whispered. Perfect, Mia replied instantly. But Jason, this is already deeper than we planned. You need to stay within the fallback boundary. They passed through a commercial-grade kitchen, stainless steel counters, and open crates of supplies. Gaza held a swinging door open with his shoulder, leading into a large walk-in refrigerator. Jason made a show of checking temperatures, inspecting labels, peeking into boxes. His glasses recorded everything. When the inspection was done, he stepped back and casually asked, Hey, is there a restroom I can use real quick? Yeah, Gaza said, pointing vaguely down the corridor. Out that door, first hallway on the left. Thanks. Jason gave a quick nod, walked through the indicated exit, and immediately turned right instead of left. Jason! Mia's voice came sharply through the earpiece, tension laced through every word. What are you doing? This isn't the plan. I know, he whispered, walking briskly, but with the purposeful gait of someone who belonged there. But I might not get another chance like this. The hallway he entered was quieter, cleaner. Pale walls, cheap linoleum floors, overhead fluorescents, buzzing faintly. Bulletin boards listed shift rotations, fire evacuation maps, even a flyer for a lost cat. Oddly domestic touches in such a secretive place. 600 viewers now, Mia said, voice tight. Words spreading like wildfire. At the next junction, Jason noticed something shift. The walls darkened. The lighting turned colder. The textures changed from linoleum and plaster to metal and matte black paneling. Ahead, a door sealed off a new corridor. No windows. A keypad security lock blinked red. Dead end, Jason muttered. He turned slightly, preparing to walk away. When the door opened, a woman in a white lab coat stepped out, absorbed in something on her tablet. Jason's mind raced. He took a breath and stepped toward her. Excuse me, he said in an uncertain voice. I think I'm lost, trying to get back to the loading dock. She stopped, startled, looked up. How did you get in here? Jason gestured vaguely behind him. I'm with the food delivery. First time on this route. I was looking for the restroom and... Yeah. She stared at him a second too long. This is a restricted wing. You're not supposed to be here. I figured. I got turned around, he said with a sheepish shrug. I'll head back. Take the second left and follow the green signs, she said. Thanks. As she walked away, Jason noticed something. The doctor she came through hadn't fully latched. The lock hadn't re-engaged. Jason, don't, Mia warned in his ear. I'm serious. Don't do this. But he was already moving. In one smooth motion, Jason slipped through the half-open door, gently easing it closed behind him. He was inside. I'm in, he whispered, adrenaline pouring through him like ice water. Jason, Mia's voice cracked. What are you seeing? Tell me exactly. And start heading back. Now. But Jason stood frozen. The corridor in front of him was nothing like the others. Dim lights lined the floor instead of the ceiling, casting long, unnatural shadows. The air felt different. Cooler, heavier. A low hum vibrated through the walls. Every few feet there were doors, thick, reinforced, with no handles, just control panels next to them. Down the hall, one of the doors was slightly ajar. A red light blinked above it. Inside, Jason could see something, moving. Unlike the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of the main facility, this part of the complex felt wrong, alien. Everything about it seemed out of place. Jason stood still, his breath catching as he slowly turned in a circle, the lens of his glasses scanning every inch. The walls, he murmured, almost to himself. They're not steel. It's some kind of metal I've never seen. It's got this glow, like it's alive. The corridor curved gently to the left, lit by narrow bands of recessed lighting that pulsed faintly, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. There were no doors, no signs, no intersections. Just a single, unnerving path that led deeper into the unknown. Jason, you've got over 1,000 viewers now, Maya's voice crackled in his earpiece. The stream's blowing up, but seriously, you need to get out of there. This wasn't part of the plan. Jason didn't even hesitate. I can't, he said quietly, awe creeping into his tone. Not now, I'm too close. As he moved forward, the floor vibrated faintly beneath his boots, a soft hum that buzzed in his bones. The air grew colder with each step. Soon, he could see his breath forming in wispy clouds. There are markings on the walls, he said, raising a hand to run his fingers just above the surface. Symbols, not English, not any language I recognize. Jason, Maya warned, her voice lower now, more urgent. Security's going to notice you're gone any minute. Jason froze. Wait, he whispered. There was a sound, quiet, almost too faint to catch. Maya heard it too. Through his mic, a low melodic hum came through, soft and strange, as if the metal itself were singing. Do you hear that? He asked. Yeah, she whispered. Where's it coming from? I don't know, Jason replied, his voice unsteady. But it feels intentional, like it's trying to talk. The corridor opened up slowly into a wider space, revealing a massive circular chamber ahead. Jason stepped in cautiously, eyes wide. Oh my God, he breathed. Suspended in the center of the chamber was something impossible. Floating 3 feet off the ground was an object that looked half alive, half machine. It pulsed with soft light, swirls of blue and purple gliding beneath a translucent skin. Maya, are you seeing this? Jason's voice shook. Tell me you're recording this. I'm recording, she confirmed quickly, her usual skepticism forgotten. But Jason, what the hell is that thing? I don't know, he said. But it's real. The object was ovoid, maybe 10 feet across, with strange tendrils or appendages that slowly extended and retracted like it was tasting the air. As Jason moved closer, the light inside it shifted patterns, reacting to him. It's responding to me, he whispered, stepping toward it. The lights, they changed when I walked in. Around the perimeter of the chamber were sleek, silent computer workstations. High-end scientific equipment surrounded the room in a perfect ring. Jason approached one of the monitors. The screen came to life as his glasses scanned it. Lines of data, charts, readings, all centered on the entity in the middle of the room. This is it, Maya, he said, his voice filled with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. This is what my dad was talking about. This isn't just tech. It's not a ship. It's alive. Or something pretending to be. Jason, Maya said, her voice steadier now. Be careful. You don't know what this thing can do. Jason slowly circled the room, the lenses in his glasses capturing everything. The same strange symbols from the corridor were etched into the chamber walls. But here, They were arranged like charts. Star maps, he muttered. But not of our solar system. The humming intensified the closer he got to the entity. The air was freezing now. Frost formed on the consoles and along the floor. 2,000 viewers now, Maya reported. And the chat's going. Nuts. Some think it's real. Others think it's CGI. A few think you're about to get abducted. It's real, Jason said. He reached out slowly toward the entity. I can feel the cold coming off it, and the air's charged, like right, before a lightning strike. Just as his hand hovered inches from the membrane, a voice rang out behind him. Calm, measured. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Jason jerked around, heart pounding. Standing in the doorway was a man in a white lab coat. He wasn't what Jason had imagined. No cybernetic implants, no eerie glow of clandestine science. Just a middle-aged man, slightly balding, with wireframe glasses, and the calm look of someone who had seen too much. You don't have clearance to be here, the man said evenly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't sound alarmed, didn't call security, just watched Jason with tired, knowing eyes. What is this thing? Jason demanded, pointing at the floating entity with a shaky hand. His voice echoed through the cold, humming chamber. The man in the lab coat didn't flinch. That's classified. Jason narrowed his eyes. You already knew I'd ask that, didn't you? The scientist gave a small, almost amused tilt of his head. We knew you'd come, Mr. Reeve. Jason's stomach dropped. A chill worse than the cold air crept down his spine. You know who I am. We know about your channel, your theories, your little deep dives into government cover-ups and unexplained phenomena. The man stepped closer, hands in his pockets. We've been monitoring your progress for a while now. Jason took a step back, uncertain. We? The project team, the scientist clarified. Though I suspect you're more interested in what that is, he gestured to the entity, than who we are. As if reacting to their conversation, the entity pulsed more brightly, its tendrils twitching and curling faster, like it was listening, maybe even agitated. Is it alive? Jason asked, his voice lowering, his journalistic instincts overriding the fear clawing at the edge of his mind. In a way, the scientist said, watching the thing with a strange reverence. Not how we usually define life. It exists in multiple states at once, possibly even multiple dimensions. Jason's brow furrowed. And you're studying it. We're communicating with it, the man corrected. Or at least trying to. It's complicated. Jason's thoughts spun wildly. This wasn't just evidence. This was history. An entire hidden chapter of it. How long has it been here? Since 47, the scientist replied without pause. Though not in this form, it's evolved. Jason's breath hitched. Suddenly, a blaring alarm echoed through the corridor behind him. Red lights began flashing. The hum of emergency power kicked in. That would be security finally realizing you're missing, the scientist said with a weary sigh. I had hoped for more time. Time for what? Jason asked, slowly backing toward another exit on the far side of the chamber. To explain, the man said. He gestured at Jason's glasses. Yes, I know you're live streaming. That's why I came in person instead of letting them drag you out. Jason hesitated. Why tell me anything at all? The scientist looked at the entity, then back to Jason. Because it wants me to. Jason stared at him. It? The man pointed directly at the hovering object. It's been waiting. For someone like you. Before Jason could respond, the entity flared with light, so bright it forced him to shield his eyes. In his earpiece, Maya's voice cracked with panic. Jason, the feed's glitching. Something's wrong. The entity began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, the membrane thinning into near transparency. Inside, complex mechanisms, or organs, shifted and pulsed with impossible geometry. It was technology and biology, fused together in ways that defied logic. What's happening? Jason cried, stumbling back from the dazzling light. Contact, the scientist whispered. barely audible over the rising pitch in the air. It's never done this before. Then Jason heard it. A voice, not through the room, not in his ears, but directly inside his head. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language he could identify. And yet, he understood. "You have found us at last. Maya," he gasped. "Are you getting this? The audio's cutting out. Jason, your feed's blowing up. Over 20,000 viewers and climbing. But I can't hear clearly." The entity's glow intensified, the shadows in the room twisting into unnatural shapes. The air felt heavy, charged like a thunderstorm about to break. Jason's mind reeled. This was real. All of it. And somehow, the thing, whatever it was, had reached inside him. "We have waited," the voice continued, "through many cycles of your star, for one who could see." "See what?" Jason asked aloud, not knowing if he needed to speak or merely think. The truth between worlds. The scientist had moved to one of the consoles, fingers flying over the keys, eyes wide with amazement. "It's never communicated this clearly," he muttered, mostly to himself. 75 years, and nothing like this. Outside, the alarms continued to blare, but no guards came. No doors opened, no footsteps echoed. Jason shot a quick glance toward the corridor. "Why hasn't anyone shown up?" "They won't," the scientist replied, not looking away from the data. "Not until it's done." Jason turned back to the entity. "What are you?" The tendrils extended outward, weaving a pattern in the air, something symmetrical, complex, almost sacred in shape. The room's temperature plummeted. Frost laced across the control panels. Ice clung to Jason's lashes and his eyebrows. "We are observers," the voice echoed in his skull. "Collectors of knowledge, travelers between. Possibilities. Aliens," Jason whispered. "No," the voice corrected. "Not foreign, not from elsewhere. We are of here, always have been. We exist in the spaces between what you perceive." The scientist gave a soft laugh, not mocking, just weary. "That's what we've been trying to explain to the higher-ups for decades. They're not from another star, they're from a fold, a hidden dimension that intersects with our own." Jason looked back at the entity, and it pulsed again, this time in what he could only interpret as agreement. Jason stared into the shifting glow. "You've been here since 1947? he asked, his voice barely steady. "A fragment of us appeared. Then," the voice answered. Calm, resonant, not from the entity's mouth, but directly inside Jason's mind. "When your weapons tore rifts in the layers between realities." "Nuclear testing," one of the scientists added, stepping closer. "The Trinity test and everything that followed. Those detonations created quantum disturbances, disruptions in the dimensional fabric. We still don't fully understand what we triggered." Jason's thoughts reeled. Everything he thought he knew bent under the weight of that revelation. So, Roswell wasn't a UFO crash. "Not a crash," the scientist said, his tone somber. "It was a breach, a point of entry, something, part of it, slipped through into our world." Jason turned to the comm unit strapped to his shoulder. "Maya," he whispered, "are you hearing this?" Her voice crackled through the static. "Partially. The signal's degrading fast. But Jason, something else is happening. I'm picking up chatter on emergency channels. Military units are mobilizing." Jason's heart pounded. He turned to the scientist. "Why now? Why reach out to me after all this time?" The scientist looked helpless. "We don't know. It's never tried to speak to us directly. It watches. It lets us run tests. But it never interacts. Because you," the voice said firmly to Jason, "are the messenger, the one chosen, to share truth through my presence." Jason swallowed hard. "My followers, they need to know. The truth has to spread. The veil is thinning, isn't it?" The entity's radiance pulsed suddenly, brighter, sharper, Intricate patterns appeared in the air, drawn in blazing lines of light. Symbols, numbers, abstract geometric forms danced around him. "It's showing me something," Jason said, eyes wide as the symbols flooded his mind. Equations, models, space folding in on itself. The scientist stepped closer, light from the entity reflecting off his glasses. "Coordinates? No. Predictions," Jason murmured. "Something's coming." The voice continued, more urgent now. "Your weapons do not only wound with force, they fracture reality through observation. The act of looking changes what is. Quantum observation," the scientist whispered, stunned. "But this is on a scale we've never seen." Outside, thunder rumbled without a storm. The lights dimmed. The entity spoke again, but now its tone had shifted. Lower, warped slightly. "The sky darkens. Through the tears, they arrive." Jason stiffened. "Who? Who's coming through?" The voice didn't answer with words. Instead, it pushed images into Jason's consciousness, visions he didn't see with his eyes but felt in every cell. He saw movement between stars, shadows slipping through voids, vast intelligences that defied language, crawling across the edges of perception. "Others," Jason gasped. "They're not like you." "No," the voice said. "They do not observe, they consume." The scientist's face turned pale. "It's trying to warn us." "Warn us about what?" Jason asked, his voice raw. Before the entity could respond, a siren blared, deeper, more urgent than the standard alarms. Red lights strobed violently across the chamber, casting long, surreal shadows. The scientist looked up, eyes wide. "They've initiated containment protocols. Full facility lockdown." Jason turned sharply. "Because of me?" The scientist shook his head. "No, because of that." He pointed toward the entity. It was changing. Its surface shimmered erratically, the usual soft violet and blue tones now interspersed with flashes of deep, angry red. The light inside it flickered like a flame caught in a windstorm. Then the voice shifted, broken, glitching. "It's here, already opening. They sense me. They come." Jason's earpiece hissed with static before Maya's voice broke through. "Jason, something's interfering with everything. Comms, signals. It's all falling apart. The stream, and..." Then silence. The entity convulsed violently. Tendrils of light whipped outwards. One lashed through a nearby console. Sparks flew. The screen exploded into darkness. "It's destabilizing," the scientist said, backing away. "It's not holding together in our dimension. It's phasing." The chamber doors slammed open. Armed personnel stormed in, not standard military. These figures wore heavy, black containment suits marked with strange, unfamiliar insignias. "On the ground!" one of them shouted, weapon aimed directly at Jason. Jason raised his hands but didn't move. "People need to know what's happening here," he said, nodding toward his glasses. "Thousands are watching." "Not anymore," said the leader coldly. "All transmissions from this facility have been cut." Jason turned to the scientist. "Is it true?" The man nodded grimly. "It's true." Jason stared them down. "You can't stop it. The stream was mirrored. Multiple relays. You can't erase what's already been seen." The containment team hesitated. Behind them, the entity pulsed again. And something bigger than any of them, began to press through. The entity emitted a high-pitched whine, sharp, metallic, almost like tearing metal and screaming, static layered over one another. The sound hit everyone at once. The armed personnel flinched, some grabbing their helmets as if trying to block it out. Jason felt it rattle through his skull like a tuning fork driven straight into his spine. The overhead lights flickered violently, casting the chamber into alternating flashes of white and deep shadow. For a few heartbeats, reality itself seemed to ripple, like a mirage on desert pavement. The air thickened. Objects lost their edges, warping slightly, as if the room had become a half-remembered dream struggling to stay together. "Tell them," the voice in Jason's mind urged, its tone weaker now, fraying at the edges like a corrupted file. "The sky has changed. The stars move. They come." "Sir," one of the soldiers said sharply, turning to the lead scientist. "Project Overthrow has been authorized. We need to move you. Now." The scientist's face went pale. "That protocol hasn't been touched since 1979. Jason stepped toward them. "What the hell is Project Overthrow?" The scientist didn't look at him at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was grim. "It's a dimensional reset, a failsafe. If something ever broke through and couldn't be contained, they'd try to sever the link." Jason's throat tightened. "And what happens to it?" he asked, gesturing toward the entity, which was now pulsing erratically, its core flickering with unstable bursts of crimson and violet. The scientist glanced at it, then looked away. "It gets pushed back, along with anything else that doesn't belong." Jason didn't need him to say the rest. He understood. That meant the entity and him. He pressed a finger to his earpiece. "Maya, if you're still there, back everything up. Download the footage, mirror it, spread it." Static was his only reply. The soldiers formed a circle around him, weapons raised. One of them stepped forward, his voice firm and robotic under the helmet. "Jason Reeve," he said, "you're hereby detained under National Security Directive 133. Surrender all recording devices immediately." Jason stood his ground. "People need to know." He didn't get to finish. The entity released a final piercing cry, not just a sound, but a shockwave of raw force that knocked every person in the room to their knees. Jason clutched his skull, eyes wide, gasping, as a surge of pain and alien energy rushed through him. "Remember," the voice whispered, softer now, fading fast. The sky used to be bluer. Jason's vision tunneled. The last thing he saw was the entity collapsing inward, its form imploding like a dying star. A vortex of light and shadow twisted around it, warping everything nearby. Machines groaned, the walls shuddered, and gravity itself seemed to bend. Then, silence and darkness. 3 days later, Maya Torres sat hunched over in her dimly lit apartment, surrounded by glowing monitors, cables, coffee-stained mugs, and a mountain of energy drink cans. Her eyes were ringed with dark circles, skin pale from lack of sleep. The hum of hard drives and cooling fans was the only sound. She hadn't left the room since the night of the stream. The footage had cut off exactly 73 minutes after. Jason entered the restricted site. The last few frames had shown the entity's collapse, soldiers rushing in, Jason falling, and then nothing. A dead signal. A hard stop. But over 50,000 people had seen it live. At first, the internet exploded. Forums lit up. Hashtags trended. People demanded answers. Then came the pushback. Government spokespeople labeled the footage a hoax, a digital stunt, AI-generated nonsense, a viral campaign. News outlets dismissed it. Social media platforms began flagging and deleting the clips. Whole accounts were suspended overnight. The stream was scrubbed, but not completely. Copies popped up and vanished across obscure platforms, always just ahead of takedown orders. Maya had spent every waking second trying to stay ahead of them, re-uploading, archiving, posting frame-by-frame analyses. She'd also tried to contact Jason, his phone, his socials, even his old university email. No response, no bounces, just silence. She'd reached out to Desert Valley Logistics. They claimed to have no record of anyone named Jason Reeve. It was like he'd never existed. Maya sat back and stared at her main monitor. It played the final seconds of the stream on loop. She'd slowed the footage to half speed, zoomed in, enhanced every frame. The entity folding inward, the distortion of space, A strange moment where the edges of the screen bent in on themselves, the colors that didn't belong to any natural spectrum. No visual effects team could have created that. Not live, not in real time, not without detection. Her phone buzzed. Another takedown notice, another obscure mirror of the stream gone. Maya exhaled sharply and whispered her mantra, the one she'd been repeating every time she felt the pressure to give up. They can't erase it all. She rubbed her eyes, thinking about Jason, about the last thing he'd said. If you're getting this, back it up. Share it. A sudden knock startled her. She froze. No one was supposed to know where she lived. Her heart thudded as she stood up, glancing around the apartment. She quietly approached the door and peered through the peephole. A delivery driver stood on the other side, holding a small padded envelope. "Delivery for Torres," the person said. Maya hesitated. "I didn't order anything." The delivery driver shrugged. "Just doing my job, ma'am." They held up a digital signature pad. "Sign here." Still cautious, Maya slid open the door just enough to accept the package, the security chain still in place. She signed quickly, took the envelope, and shut the door again, locking it immediately. No return address, just her name printed in bold, blocky letters. Her fingers trembled as she held it, heart racing, dread crawling up her spine. She peeled back the flap. With trembling fingers, Maya pried open the small padded envelope. Nestled inside was a single USB drive, black, unmarked, and completely ordinary. It looked like something anyone might carry around, the kind of device you toss into a drawer and forget. But this one had weight, not physical, but emotional. Dread pooled in her stomach as she stared at it, heart pounding. She took it to her old isolation laptop, the one she used only for handling questionable files. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, nothing that could connect it to the outside world. She sat at the small desk by the window, her hand hovering for a moment, before plugging the USB in. The drive clicked into place, and the screen came to life. Her antivirus software scanned it automatically. No threats detected. There was only one file. It was labeled in lowercase, final.mp3 Maya. Hesitated, her thumb resting on the trackpad. A chill ran down her arms. She double-clicked. The speakers crackled with static before Jason's voice filled the room, faint, distorted, as if it had passed through layers of interference or had been recorded in a tunnel. "Maya, if you're hearing this, the dead man's switch worked." Her breath caught. "I don't know what happened after they took me. I don't even know if I'm still alive. But I need you to understand what I saw, what they showed me." Tears welled in her eyes. Jason sounded broken, tired, but also clearer than she remembered in his last few broadcasts. "The Antiti, they aren't what we thought. They showed me things, other dimensions, cracks in reality itself. There are things living just outside what we can perceive. Not ghosts, not aliens, something else. They're ancient, and they're getting closer." Maya sat still, listening as Jason's voice dipped lower, as if he feared being overheard even now. The entity wasn't just talking to me, it was using me, using us. It needed people to know. It wanted to be seen, just enough to make people question what's real. "Something's coming, Maya. Something's been trying to break through for decades." The recording buzzed, glitched, then resumed. "They'll say it's fake. They'll discredit the footage. But thousands saw the stream. Go live. Some already believe. The truth's out there now, not whole, but scattered. And that's what it wants. Not one person holding everything, but everyone holding something. Collective awareness." Maya wiped her face. She hadn't realized she'd started crying. "I'm not coming back from this. I know that. But you have to keep going. Keep pushing the message. Watch the sky, Maya. It's changing. Slowly, subtly. The blue isn't the same anymore." There was a sharp burst of static. Then silence. Maya stared at the screen. The playback bar had reached the end. She sat motionless, her mind swimming. Then, slowly, She stood, walked to her main computer, and started typing. She created burner accounts, set up cloud mirrors, began seeding the audio on obscure forums, encrypted archives, and darknet boards. Jason's voice wouldn't die in silence. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Messages poured in from old contacts, truth seekers, online friends, former colleagues. Did you see the stream? Is Jason okay? Was it real? She didn't have simple answers, but she knew what she had to do. Outside, the sun had almost set. Maya stood by the window and looked up. The sky had taken on a dull grey-blue hue, warmer near the horizon, paler overhead. Had it always looked like this? She couldn't be sure, but something about it felt off, like a word on the tip of your tongue or a shape behind frosted glass. Her inbox lit up. Copies of Jason's final stream were resurfacing. Anonymous accounts were uploading it. Dozens of strangers refusing to let it vanish. The paranoia was catching. The questions were spreading, just as he said it would. Jason Reeves had ignited something. A fracture in collective belief. A crack in the wall. And the cracks were growing. The terminal stretched out before Evelyn, vast and echoing. Her boots tapped softly across the polished tiles. It was well past midnight, but the airport still buzzed faintly with activity. Barely. A few janitors drifted like shadows in fluorescent light, pushing carts and whispering. Among themselves, a lone security guard walked a routine patrol, barely glancing her way. Still, something about the place felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. Too staged. She glanced up at the cathedral high ceilings and the surreal artwork suspended above. White, steel beams branched out like bones, and murals covered the walls with jarring symbolism, burning cities, masked children, and soldiers with swords. The whole space felt less like an airport and more like a dream someone had forgotten to finish. Bigger than the city of San Francisco, she muttered under her breath. Why build an airport this enormous for a city that didn't need it? Evelyn had checked into the adjacent airport hotel under a fake name. It gave her an excuse to roam without raising eyebrows. Tomorrow, she'd start the real work. Interviews, photos, FOIA requests. But tonight, something told her to look around. Alone, while the place was asleep. She wandered to the southern end of the main terminal. That's where the strange marker was, the one people whispered about on conspiracy forums. There it was. A dedication capstone embedded in the floor. Clean black granite, polished to a mirror finish. The Masonic square and compass carved boldly into its surface. Below it, the date of dedication, March 19th, 1994, and the name of the organization that had funded it, the New World Airport Commission. She crouched down, her fingers hovering above the etching. There's no such thing as the New World Airport Commission, she said quietly to herself. It doesn't exist. It never existed. She had checked. Deep searches, official databases, even off-the-record sources. No records, no funding trails. Nothing. And yet there it was, chiseled in stone. She looked around. No one was watching. Her hand rested on the cool granite. Beneath her palm, billions of dollars of unaccounted infrastructure. DIA had gone $2 billion over. Budget. No clear explanation. Some said tunnels. Others said bunkers. Some even said a deep underground facility was hidden beneath, connected by sealed shafts and secret elevators. Evelyn stood slowly, her eyes scanning the far reaches of the terminal. She had seen too much to dismiss it as paranoia. The art, the secrecy, the inexplicable cost, the whispers of testing and disappearances. Something had been built here, and it wasn't just an airport. Evelyn knelt near the granite dedication stone, fingers brushing the cool floor as if to tie her bootlace. But really, she tilted the tiny pendant at her neck, angling it just right. The hidden lens blinked, capturing a high-resolution image of the marker without a sound. She murmured under her breath, "The New World Airport Commission doesn't exist." And it didn't. Not in any government registry, not in any non-profit directory, not even as a defunct organization. She had dug through federal and state records, scoured databases, even pinged a few contacts in Washington. No traces, no tax IDs, nothing. It was a name carved in stone, but nowhere else. That was what chilled her the most. "Hiding in plain sight," she whispered, tracing the Masonic square and compass symbol with the tip of her finger. The inscription didn't mention Denver, not Colorado, not even the United States. It simply stated that the airport had been built for the people of the New World. She rose slowly, brushing off her jeans. That's when she noticed him, a security guard posted nearby, unusually still. He wasn't pretending to scan the terminal or walk a route. He was watching her directly. Evelyn forced a casual smile, nodded, and strolled away like any weary traveler. But she could feel his eyes, sharp and unwavering, trailing her all the way to the concourse. Was she being paranoid? Or had they already tagged her as suspicious? She moved calmly toward the hotel attached to the terminal. The murals on the walls loomed as she passed. So saturated in color, they almost pulsed under the terminal's dim overnight lights. She paused for a breath, taking in the nightmarish images. Children lying in coffins, a figure in a gas mask holding a curved blade and an assault rifle, flames licking the edges of cities, extinct animals frozen in time. In one corner, a young girl cradled a limp leopard in her arms. Indigenous elders wept into the soil, surrounded by toppled forests. The artist claimed the murals were about hope after catastrophe, a journey from destruction to peace. But standing there, Evelyn didn't feel peace. She felt like she was being warned or shown plans. At the hotel desk, the night clerk barely looked up. He slid her room key across the counter with mechanical precision. "Enjoy your stay at DIA," he said, eyes fixed on the monitor in front of him. Evelyn smiled, her voice even. "I'm sure I will. It's quite an impressive facility." The clerk's fingers paused over the keyboard. He looked up at her with sudden, eerie interest. His gaze locked on hers. "It's larger than most people realize," he said quietly. "Most of it, you'll never see." The words lingered. There was no smile in his voice, no sense of irony, just cold certainty. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Good to know." She walked toward the elevators, the keycard warm in her palm. She didn't look back, but the tension in her neck didn't release until she was inside her room with the bolt turned and the chain latched. Her room was bland and corporate, all beige and muted greys, but she barely noticed. She unzipped her shoulder bag and spread its contents across the bed. Dozens of printouts, screenshots of emails, decrypted fragments, odd symbols, scanned maps with uneven lines, inconsistencies in floor plans. All of it focused on one recurring phrase. Level. Subnormal. 3. Whatever that meant, it had been mentioned in every message she'd received. Sometimes in headers, sometimes hidden in the body text or image metadata. She arranged the documents across the bedspread like puzzle pieces, trying to see what fit. There were mentions of maintenance hatches, sealed hallways, ventilation access points. One blurry photo showed a concrete corridor descending into darkness. No signs, no lights. Evelyn stood and moved to the window. Out across the runway fields, bathed in floodlights, the infamous blue Mustang sculpture stood rearing against the night sky. The locals called it Blucifer. Its red LED eyes glowed like twin coals, piercing the darkness. The thing had killed its own creator during construction. That fact alone should have kept it in storage. Instead, the airport had made it a landmark. Farther beyond the statue, planes landed and departed in clean arcs across the runways. But from above, she'd seen the satellite shots. The runways formed a pattern. A jagged, unmistakable swastika. Another. Coincidence, they said. Like the murals. Like the plaque. Like the missing billions in construction overages. Evelyn checked her watch. 3:42 a.m. She should sleep. But sleep felt impossible. Who had sent the emails? Why her? She'd covered strange stories before. NSA leaks, secret prisons, mind control programs. But nothing like this. The trail hadn't just led to secrets. It had led to something active. Alive. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her recorder pen, clicked it on, and spoke softly. Day 0 at DIA. Beginning initial documentation. Tomorrow, I'll start mapping the visible to find the invisible. According to the emails, this isn't just an airport. It's the entrance to something much bigger and much darker. She set the pen down. The lights in the room flickered. Just once. A quick dim, like the voltage had dropped. Evelyn froze. The hum of the AC faded just enough for her to notice something beneath it. A low vibration. Faint, but real. Like the muffled rumble of machinery deep underground. Slow, rhythmic, mechanical. She stood still, trying to isolate the sound. Then it was gone. Morning came with the sharpness of artificial routine. The airport was awake again. Crowds moving, announcements buzzing. Through overhead speakers, the hiss of coffee machines in every corner cafe. Uniforms smiled. Children cried. It was all too normal. And yet, none of it felt real. Evelyn sat in the south atrium, cradling a paper cup of bitter airport coffee. Her laptop was open, but her eyes were on the murals. This time, she wasn't. Rushing past them, she was documenting. The first panel was titled, Children of the World Dream of Peace. It dominated the space with surreal violence. A towering military figure in a gas mask sliced through the air with a curved blade, an AK-47 slung over his back. At his feet, doves lay skewered, their wings bloodied. Behind him, women wept over small shrouded bodies. Coffins. Children. And, across from it, the second panel. A utopia. Children of every ethnicity gathered beneath a radiant figure holding a blossoming plant. Flags of every nation arched behind them like a rainbow. The world healed. Evelyn snapped high-resolution photos, zoomed in, noted details. The mural's symmetry felt calculated. Like the second panel wasn't hope, it was resolution. The world after something. The messages had mentioned symbols, warnings, patterns. Evelyn's phone buzzed. An encrypted notification, new message, unknown sender. Her stomach tightened as she tapped the screen. Subnormal 3 opens at 02:17 tonight. Location, North Baggage Access Tunnel. Come alone. She looked up slowly from the phone, the murals still looming around her. Beneath the performance of normal life, something waited. Something that had invited her in. Disturbing, aren't they? Evelyn flinched at the unexpected voice. An elderly man had quietly taken the seat beside her. She glanced down at the laminated badge clipped to his chest. Walter Simmons, Maintenance Division. She forced a polite smile. They're definitely unusual for an airport, she replied, gesturing vaguely toward the enormous murals behind the security checkpoint. Walter nodded thoughtfully. Leo Tanguma, that's the artist, claims those paintings represent peace overcoming, war, and humanity choosing nature over destruction. That's the official story, right? Evelyn asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. Walter's lips curled into a grin, exposing yellowed, tobacco-stained teeth. Every place has stories. This one has more than its fair share. He tapped the badge on his chest. Been working here 32 years, since before the place even opened. Evelyn shut her laptop, intrigued. I'd love to hear what you've seen. Walter eyed her with cautious amusement. Most people don't give a damn what an old janitor thinks. I'm writing a piece on unique airport architecture and art. She lied without missing a beat. Your insight would be valuable. He squinted at her for a long moment, then nodded subtly toward a large stone slab embedded in the floor near the terminal's main entrance. You see that dedication capstone? You ever wonder what UAG means? The letters under the Freemason symbol? Chemical symbols for gold and silver, Evelyn offered. That's what they tell tourists. Walter leaned in, voice lowered. But in ancient alchemy, those symbols stand for transformation, the breaking down of the old to create something new. Before Evelyn could respond, Walter stood abruptly and adjusted the mop in his hands. "Meet me at closing time," he said quietly. "Baggage claim level, carousel 19. If you're really curious about this place." And with that, he turned and shuffled into the crowd, vanishing between the bustling lines of tired travelers. Evelyn sat there for a moment, pulse quickened. Then she opened her bag, grabbed her camera, and got to work. For the next several hours, she documented everything unusual the airport had to offer. Gargoyle statues rising out of open suitcases near security, floor tiles bearing Navajo designs, but arranged in formations that looked eerily like circuitry. Her camera shutter clicked, over and over, as she circled a sleek black marble slab near the south terminal. It was a time capsule, scheduled to be opened in 2094, its inscription crediting the enigmatic New World Airport Commission, an organization that, as far as Evelyn could tell, had never existed. She paused at another strange installation, a bronze plaque showing paper airplanes spiraling around tall skyscrapers. According to the date, it had been installed years before 9/11. Embedded around it in the terrazzo flooring were unmistakable Freemason symbols. Evelyn felt a chill despite the warmth of the terminal. The deeper she looked, the more it all matched. What the anonymous emails had hinted. Denver International Airport wasn't just an airport. It was a mosaic of hidden messages, symbols whispering something just beneath the surface. But who was sending them, and who were they for? By late afternoon, Evelyn had mapped out the entire public area. Her notepad was filled with notes and sketches. She'd cross-referenced everything with the redacted documents her contact had leaked. The more she dug, the more it all felt like a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. One detail in particular nagged at her. The airport's underground baggage system had been a colossal failure, scrapped after swallowing millions in taxpayer dollars. And yet, records showed construction continuing underground for years afterward. Equipment logs didn't lie. Massive tunnel boring machines were still active long after the airport officially opened. At 9:45 p.m., Evelyn made her way to baggage claim. Carousel 19 was still, dark. The only sound was the occasional ding of an arriving tram and the low murmur of cleaning crews. Walter stood nearby, mop in hand, pushing it across a floor that was already spotless. He looked up and gave a small nod. "You actually came," he muttered, sounding almost surprised. "Follow me. Don't talk." He led her through a service door labelled Authorized Personnel Only. The hallway behind it was narrow, lined with exposed pipes and buzzing conduit lines. They turned left, then right, moving deeper into the maintenance labyrinth. Eventually, Walter used his ID badge to open another locked door. The sign read, Tunnel System Grid B. "Why are you showing me this?" Evelyn whispered as the door creaked. "Open." Walter stepped into the yawning concrete corridor beyond. The tunnel was enormous, easily large enough to drive a semi-truck through. It sloped gently downward, disappearing into the shadows. "I'm retiring next month," he said without turning. "I've kept my mouth shut for 32 years. Maybe it's time someone knew." They walked in silence, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off cold cement walls. Evelyn checked her phone. No signal. The GPS showed their position sliding, well beyond the boundaries of the official airport grounds. But the tunnel kept going. 5 levels were in the original plans, Walter said. "But we built 8. The lowest 3 officially don't exist." Evelyn's heart skipped. "Who's we? Who ordered that?" Walter chuckled dryly, without humour. "I've asked myself that for decades." The tunnel seemed to stretch into infinity. The construction teams were compartmentalized, Walter explained as they walked, his voice low and grim. Different contractors for different jobs. No one ever saw the full design. Everyone just followed orders. Evelyn glanced at him, then back at the corridor ahead. That doesn't make sense for a project this size. Exactly, Walter muttered. It was never about baggage. As they continued, the tunnel widened into a chamber filled with industrial machinery. Evelyn paused, eyes sweeping across massive air handling systems, rows of gleaming water purification, tanks, and hulking power generators that looked more suited for a military bunker than an airport. "This is overkill," she whispered. "Self-sufficient," Walter replied, following her gaze. "Independent power, water, air filtration. This whole place could shut itself off from the outside world and keep running for years." Evelyn took a slow breath. The deeper they went, the more the airport above felt like a mask. This, whatever this was, felt like the real face underneath. After about 20 minutes of walking, the modern concrete tunnel gave way to something older. The sharp lines of construction blurred into a rugged, uneven corridor. The walls here were partially natural rock, partially dug out, rough, raw, and unsettling. Walter slowed. "This wasn't in any blueprint," he said quietly. "We hit it during excavation. There was talk, rumors about ancient tunnels running beneath the area. Native tribes told stories about gates to the underworld buried here." Evelyn snapped a photo with her pendant camera, the lens catching the intersection between sterile concrete and weathered stone. Her fingers hovered near the jagged archway ahead. "What's down there?" Walter's expression darkened. "Don't. No. They sealed it off right after we found it. Armed guards stood watch for weeks. No explanations." He pointed to a symbol carved into the archway stone, a triangle with a single eye at its center. It wasn't chiseled like a construction mark. It looked worn, ancient, as if it had been there long before the airport ever existed. "That wasn't made by anyone on our crew," Walter said, voice tight. Evelyn stared at the symbol, unease prickling her skin. Then came the sound, a low hum, deep and vibrating through the tunnel like something alive. Her stomach turned. "I've heard that before," she whispered. "In my hotel room the first night." Walter's face paled. "We need to leave. Now." "What is it?" she asked, heart pounding. But Walter was already turning, briskly walking back the way they'd come. "Night shift's coming," he hissed. "If they catch us down here." They didn't run, but they moved fast, boots echoing against the concrete as the humming grew louder behind them. By the time they reached the public corridor, Evelyn's nerves were shot. Walter's radio crackled. "Copy," he said into it, his tone switching to calm professionalism. "Cleanup needed at Terminal C." Then he turned to her one last time. "Don't try to find me again," he whispered. "And whatever you do, stay out of the tunnels at night." He left without waiting for a reply. Back at her hotel room, Evelyn locked the door and pulled the curtains tight. Her hands trembled as she inserted the camera's memory card into her laptop. The images came, up one by one. The carved eye, the stone archway, the tunnels. She compared them to the documents from her anonymous source. There it was, the same eye symbol. In her source's emails, the image appeared again and again, and beneath it the same chilling phrase. "The eye watches the gate." She was typing up notes, adrenaline still pulsing, when her screen went black. Her heart stopped. The laptop rebooted, slow and flickering. When her desktop reappeared, the folder with her tunnel images was gone, empty. Panic rising, she checked her external drive. Corrupted, all of it. Then a new email appeared, sent from her own address to herself. Subject, no subject message. "Curiosity endangers more than cats. Level subnormal 3 is not for you." Evelyn stared at the screen, blood draining from her face. Someone had remote access. Someone was watching. Her eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the giant blue horse, Lucifer, loomed in the darkness, its glowing red eyes piercing through the night like embers. The same horse that had crushed its own sculptor to death. Evelyn yanked the curtains shut, heart racing, but the hum, That same low, vibrating frequency was back. Not just in her ears, but in the walls, in the floor, in the air. It was everywhere. She barely slept. By the third day, Evelyn had built a careful routine to stay invisible. Breakfast at the Terminal Cafe, laptop work in crowded areas, casual calls to her editor in Chicago about a bland, fabricated article on airport design. She blended in. Just another traveler, but every moment was calculated. She kept digging, cross-referencing Walter's story with maps and fragments from her source. The warning in the hacked message had only made her more determined. Whoever they were, they had power, technical, financial, military, enough to build 8 underground levels and erase evidence with a keystroke, but they weren't infallible. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. She had wandered into the wrong break room, intentionally acting lost, when she spotted a clipboard left on a table, a laminated maintenance schedule. She snapped a photo with her pendant camera and walked out without a word. Back in her room, she examined the image. It was gold. Not just access codes, but shift schedules. Times when the service levels would be temporarily unmonitored during staff transitions. The next night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., Evelyn stood in a maintenance hallway near the East Terminal. She wore a janitor's uniform swiped from an unlocked supply closet. Her hair was tucked under a cap. On her chest, a copied maintenance badge. She took one breath, then another, and then she swiped the badge. The words hit Evelyn like ice water. Walter played his role perfectly. She felt her stomach drop. Her mind reeled, flashing back to the nervous energy in Walter's voice, his urgent warnings, the rushed escape. Had it all been part of some elaborate setup? Had she been led here, not in spite of the danger, but because of it? The two men remained at the control panel, oblivious to her presence. They wore insignia that didn't match any known agency. No TSA, no Homeland Security. Just a black triangle on their sleeves, with the eye insignia stitched into the center. Shanghai wasn't the only one of them said. The Siberian gate destabilized for 11 seconds last week. They're calling it an echo pulse. Caused by the monolith? No confirmation yet, but they think the resonance fields are starting to overlap. That's why Denver has to come. Online first. Full capacity. The second man scrolled through monitor feeds, pausing on a thermal imaging display. Evelyn's breath caught. It showed her hotel room. A live feed. Her outline still faintly glowing where she had sat hours earlier. She's still in the area. We'll find her. The first man turned toward the exit. Prep level S4 just in case. No leaks. If containment fails, we follow zero protocol. The door hissed shut behind them. Evelyn didn't move, not at first. Her pulse thundered in her ears, every sense screaming. Walter had delivered her. Whether by choice or by pressure, he had walked her straight into the heart of something unfathomable. But what was this place? A black monolith, secret chambers, talk of gates and portals, and seismic activity syncing with underground networks. And now, resonance fields overlapping. Evelyn waited a full 5 minutes after the men left before slipping from her hiding place. She knew she couldn't go back the way she came, not without getting caught. She needed an alternate route. She slipped into the corridor again, sticking to shadows, stepping silently past the red emergency lights. Every footstep seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. The hum was louder now, almost rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. She passed several sealed doors, each labelled with cold, impersonal codes. Bio-isolate, Envirothresh Gate Core Ore. The last one drew her attention. Gate Core. That word again. She placed her ear to the door. Nothing. She swiped the stolen badge. A red light blinked. Denied. But just as she was about to move on, the door clicked. Unlocked. She slipped inside. The room was a cylinder of polished metal with a glass dome at its center, Suspended inside was a swirling black sphere the size of a beach ball, hovering inches above a triangular pedestal. Energy shimmered around it, faint arcs of static dancing along the walls. It didn't look like any machine Evelyn had ever seen. It felt alive. Data streams ran across digital panels. One screen caught her eye. Phase stabilization, 86.9% time to sync, 00:11:38. Suddenly, a voice came from the far end of the room. "You're not supposed to be here." Evelyn spun around, heart jumping. A woman stood in a dark grey lab coat, her face calm, unreadable. She wasn't armed, but her presence felt more dangerous than the two guards from earlier. "I'm not going to run," Evelyn said carefully. The woman tilted her head. "No, you're going to listen." She stepped forward, hands clasped behind her back. "We knew someone like you would come. Curiosity always finds its way to the gate." "Gate?" Evelyn asked. The woman gestured toward the hovering sphere. "The interface. The eye is not just a symbol. It's an alignment system, a key. Denver is a convergence point, one of 6. But this one was first." "Convergence of what?" The woman's lips curled into something like a smile. "Of here, and not here. Think of reality as layers, thin membranes. The monoliths are anchors, tuning forks. When their frequencies align, the veil thins. That hum you feel, it's the field syncing." Evelyn took a step back. "You're opening a portal." "We already have, briefly. The test went well. Nothing came through." Her eyes flickered. "Yet. And Walter?" "Regrettably necessary," she said with a sigh. "His conscience was a variable, one we couldn't fully suppress. But he led you where we needed." "Why?" Evelyn demanded. "Why me?" "Because you were warned. You kept going. We needed someone like that, a control sample. Now we know." "Know what?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the sphere. "It's time. The others are aligning." The screen behind her now read, "Phase stabilization, 87.0%. Time to sync, 00:0:05. "Stop it," Evelyn whispered. But the sphere pulsed, once, then again. Light filled the room, harsh and blinding. A sound like thunder and metal scraping reality itself filled her head. The walls trembled. Evelyn fell to her knees as gravity seemed to bend, and then silence. The hum was gone. When she opened her eyes, the room was empty. The woman was gone. The sphere, the control panels. Only Evelyn remained, curled on the cold floor of a completely dark and empty room. She stumbled out into the corridor. Everything was different. Silent. The red lights were dead. The pipes no longer hummed. No sound, no voices, no movement. She ran. Past the model room. The scale airport was gone. Past the security monitors. All dark. She made it to the elevator, slammed the badge. Nothing. She climbed. Stairs marked S2, S1, B4. Then, finally, ground level. She burst out into the main concourse. Except, the airport was deserted. No passengers, no announcements, no baggage carts or flickering signs, only silence. The massive murals were still there, but altered. Instead of scenes of peace and unity, they now depicted figures walking into black doorways, their bodies dissolving into static. Lucifer still stood outside the terminal, but now its glowing red eyes were aimed downward, as if watching something beneath the airport. Evelyn found her way back to the hotel, checked her laptop. Empty. Checked the internet. No connection. No signal on her phone. The TV displayed a static-filled, "Emergency broadcast message. Stand by for further instructions." She walked to the window. Outside, the sky shimmered faintly, as if reality itself had stretched too far and torn slightly at the edges. And behind the mountains, where the sun should have been rising, was only a deep violet light. The eye watches the gate, and the gate has opened. The elevator doors closed behind Evelyn, sealing her in darkness. The hum had returned. Deeper now, almost pulsing with intent. She fumbled for her flashlight, its beam slicing through the gloom. The corridor ahead was unfamiliar, its walls lined with cables and conduits that pulsed faintly with blue light. She moved cautiously, each step echoing in the silence. The air was thick, tinged with ozone and something metallic. Signs on the walls bore cryptic codes. S3 Delta, QZ17, containment access. After what felt like an eternity, she reached a large chamber. In the center stood the monolith, a towering obsidian structure that seemed to absorb light. Around it, technicians in white coats moved with purpose, their faces obscured by masks. Evelyn raised her camera, capturing images of the scene. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. "You're not supposed to be here," a voice hissed. She turned to see a woman in a grey lab coat, her eyes cold and calculating. "Who are you?" Evelyn demanded. The woman smiled. "Someone who can help. You understand." She gestured toward the monolith. "This is the gate. It's a bridge between worlds, and it's almost ready." Evelyn's mind raced. "Why me? Why bring me here?" "Because you have the curiosity to seek the truth," the woman replied, "and the courage to face it." Suddenly, alarms blared. The technicians scrambled, shouting over each other. "It's destabilizing," one yelled. The monolith pulsed, emitting a low, resonant hum that shook the chamber. Cracks appeared on its surface, light seeping through. "Get out," the woman shouted, pushing Evelyn toward the exit. Evelyn ran, the corridor collapsing behind her. She reached the elevator, slamming the button. The doors opened, and she dove inside. As the elevator ascended, she watched the floor indicator. S3, S2, S1, ground level. The doors opened to a deserted terminal. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows. She stepped out, the silence oppressive. Her phone buzzed, a new message. "The eye watches. The gate is open." She looked up to see the mural of Bay, the all-seeing eye, its gaze piercing. Evelyn knew the world had changed, and she was the only one who could tell its story.